2 years ago on Sabadi Archipelago, 11 rookie pirates appeared, each with a bounty of over 100 million berries, resulting in an incident of historic proportions. To summarize very briefly, this dude was punched by that dude, resulting in a third dude being called down from the sky to beat up all of the dudes, but all of whom managed to escape and went on to become known as the Worst Generation. However, this was not the original Worst Generation. They were simply the worst so far. And there is a whole legacy generation that came before them who I refer to as the First Worst. This original generation was birthed rather appropriately in Logtown, also known as the town of the beginning and the end, which couldn't be more true in this case, as 24 years ago saw the end of Gol D. Roger and the beginning of the First Worst Generation. 7 rookie figures gathered to witness this event, and during the next 2 decades, they would go on to turn this world upside down. This is the story of the awkward middle generation of One Piece. Because when we talk about generations, we have a tendency to focus on either the era of legends, the ones with your Rogers, your Whitebeards, and your pile of rocks. It's that, or we focus on the soon-to-be legendary generation of the Luffys, the Laws, and the other one, generally ignoring that there was an entire middle section between them, the meat of this generational sandwich, because they were the people who defined the golden age of piracy, people who formed rivalries, formed alliances, and toppled the previous generation into submission, with each and every one of them present at this snapshot in time 24 years ago, starting with the one and only Shanks, with the phrase the one and only also going on to describe Shanks's arm status. But Shanks is the Luffy of the First Worst, the undisputed leader, the first to reach all of the massive milestones, like crossing the billion-berry bounty mark and even ascending into emperorhood. However, during this moment 24 years ago, Shanks was a mere 15 years old and crying his little eyes out, much like a village boy who'd just seen his mentor's arm eaten by a very hungry fish. Despite that, Shanks went on to take his place beside Big Mom, Kaido, and Whitebeard, 3 members of the legendary generation, who all looked down upon him, both figuratively as their junior in the great game of existence, but also quite literally because he was very short compared to them. They're big. God, they're big, so big. But just look at where we are now, 24 years later, and Shanks is the last one of them standing. To contrast Shanks' tragedy, another young boy was absolutely beaming when Roger was executed, a young incarnation of the viciously flamboyant Don Quixote Doflamingo, who was a mere 17 years old, which is actually the same age as Luffy was when he became a member of the true Worst Generation. And this was long before Doflamingo occupied Dressrosa, killed Rocinante, or did anything of any real relevance other than shoot his father in the head. However, he would go on to become one of the most powerful pirates in the world, not necessarily through strength having and fight battling, but more so through networking. This is how you network. Doflamingo's bounty may be a mere fraction of Shanks's eventual 4 billion, but his influence was equitable. Doflamingo had complete command of the global underworld and also managed to trap the collective nutsack of the world nobles into a vice, managing to blackmail and control the world government itself. And what he was lacking for in power was made up for with power, because Doflamingo had Kaido backing him, essentially giving our Pink Bird man the strength of an emperor, the political power of the world government, and the nefarious options of the underworld. To this day, I don't think there has ever been a more singular influential pirate. Not even an emperor was able to pull the strings of the world in the same way that Doflamingo did. And I love that he was smiling when the First Worst formed, because in Roger's death, what Doflamingo saw was opportunity. In this moment, he saw the future instability of the world and decided that he would take full advantage of it. He's a pretty bad dude, and that's why he's given the designation of the Worst. And I would actually equate Doflamingo to a more successful Capone Gang Beige, a ruthless businessman determined to dominate the world. But ruthless domination isn't exactly a unique characteristic within the First Worst. Our third member was 19 years old when Roger was executed. His name was, and still is, Dracule Mihawk, who appears here pre-facial hair, and evidently, eventually, decided to turn his sideburns into front burns, thus discovering the wonder of the moustache. Mihawk is a great example of First Worst rivalry, specifically with Shanks. These 2 rookie pirates continuously pushed each other to get stronger and stronger and eventually sit at the very tippy top of the planet. As the world's greatest swordsman, the argument can be made that Mihawk is actually the most successful member of the First Worst, being one of the very few characters in the entire series who has achieved their goal, and who has spent modern-day One Piece perpetually bored by the lack of endgame content in his life. He also went on to become the second most valuable member of the First Worst, with a disgustingly high bounty of 3.59 billion berries. And interestingly, at the execution, Mihawk isn't crying like Shanks, nor is he laughing maniacally like Doflamingo. Instead, Mihawk is making a completely neutral expression, as if he's at an art gallery and he knows that the work in front of him has some sort of meaning, but he just doesn't quite get it. So he continues to stare aimlessly and question his life's choices of visiting the gallery to begin with. Mihawk knew that Roger's execution was an important cultural moment, but he'd still rather be home right now and read about it later. Mihawk also remains one of the few members of this generation who has yet to be toppled and torn from his first worst pedestal, although we do have a certain Zoro rabidly salivating to do just that. We also have quite a few members who have received the blunt and heavy end of this generation stick and been repeatedly bludgeoned in the skull with it. Our prime example being one Sir Crocodile, who is 22 years old, and unlike all of our other first worst members so far, he is the only one whose face we don't get to see at all during the execution, which is a key factor in fueling the idea that Crocodile was once a woman, but we don't need to go there in this video. If I had to bet, I'd say that Crocodile was definitely more on the Doflamingo scale of emotions, because Crocodile himself did pursue the dream of becoming the Pirate King after all. However, he was met with what I would describe as a Basil Hawkins series of failures. In his younger days, Crocodile's dream was first crushed by Whitebeard, who delivered Crocodile's famous facial scar, and may also very well have dehanded his hand. But did Crocodile give up? Nah. So he came up with a new plan to revive an ancient weapon and ascend to sandy glory. And that ascension would eventually occur. But unfortunately, it was due to a series of punches by a rubber man, thus crushing Crocodile's dreams a second time. But did Crocodile give up? Well, yes, temporarily. After this, Crocodile decided to remain in prison and have a bit of a think about what he'd done, but after that he emerged back into the world with a whole new and accidentally clown-related plan to go for gold a third time by spearheading Cross Guild. Come to think of it, is it insensitive to say spearheading, given that Crocodile's head was speared? I'm gonna go ahead and say no. Oh, and speaking of no, here's a fun fact that I guarantee most of you will not know. According to volume 10,089, yes, it's a real book, Crocodile fought One Piece Stampede villain Douglas Bullet 2 years prior to Roger's execution, and this fight ended in a draw, which I call absolute BS on. There is no way that Crocodile stood up to even a young Douglas Bullet. But it's all non-canon anyway, so it doesn't matter. What matters is that after decades of struggle, spearheading plans, and being speared in the head as a result of said plans, Crocodile has achieved global infamy with a bounty of close to 2 billion berries. He really is the ultimate story of inspiration. No matter how many times you fail, do not give up, because maybe one day you too will have the pleasure of serving under a clown. Speaking of, Buggy the Clown is our 5th member of the First Worst, as he was present during the execution, being a mere 15 years old, just like Shanks. And he was also crying, just like Shanks, and now he's an emperor, also just like Shanks. If Crocodile is the ultimate story of perseverance, then Buggy is the ultimate tale of equality. It doesn't matter how stupid you are or how red your nose is, you too can become a global military leader in just a few simple steps. Emperors hate this man because Buggy the Clown shows that their system doesn't require strength, talent, or even hard work. And you too can become an emperor by signing up for Buggy's Pirate Success course, link in the description, because that is exactly the sort of thing he'd do. That's what all people with no substance do. They try to sell you an online course. From the perspective of the world though, Buggy is a lurking legend who only made his presence known during Impel Down, and since then has rapidly risen to be considered an equal of Redhead Shanks, and has been granted a bounty of over 3 billion berries. And in true Worst Generation style, he has now made an alliance with 2 of his fellow First Worsts. And yeah, arguments can be made about whether or not Buggy actually deserves his success or his place in this group, but they're all wrong because the answer is simply yes. To a clown of a different sort, our 6th and penultimate First Worst is Gecko Moria, who was a sprightly 26 at the time of Logtown, and was also featuring smiling maniacally, seeing an opportunity in the commencement of the Golden Age of piracy. Unlike Doflamingo, however, Moria failed to capitalize on said opportunity, and actually it's quite sad, because barely a year after the Golden Age of piracy began is when Gecko Moria fought Kaido on Wano, where his entire crew were murdered, and all Moria took away from this experience as a souvenir was rather appropriately a corpse. Moria's pursuit of his dream was so unfortunately fleeting, and I think that this is what would have happened if the Straw Hats decided to go into the New World instead of training for 2 years. Moria is ultimately the least accomplished member of the First Worst, but even then he did become a warlord, so that is something, and strangely enough he does have one very unique title, which is that he is the only character in all of One Piece to have captained 2 separate pirate crews, the Gecko Pirates and the Thriller Bark Pirates. However, that's only because his entire first crew were killed, so it's not really a badge of honor. With that said, Moria is a very persistent creature and remains active to this very day, even though he's serving under a member of the true worst generation, there is still time and opportunity for Gecko Moria to show why he is considered to be one of the original worst. He is not finished by any means, and neither are we, because we still have one very important member. This man is not a pirate, but as far as the world government is concerned, he's even worse. His name is Monkey D. Dragon, and he was present for both the execution of Goldie Roger, as well as the intended execution of his son, Monkey D. Luffy, at the exact same place. Dragon was 31 years old at the time, thus making him the elder of the first worst. And it is interesting that Dragon showed up at all, given that the world of piracy doesn't really concern him. However, if a Dragon Rock's connection is ever made, then I can certainly see him rocking up to pay respects and or pay his vitriol to Roger. But the thing is, you don't need to be a pirate to be considered one of the worst. Diaz Drake proves that as a member of SWORD, even if he was masquerading as a pirate. Doesn't matter. The thing is that Dragon is officially recognized as the world's worst criminal, thus making him the best of the worst because he is dubbed the worst of the worst, and when you're one of the worst means the best. Also, did you know that Dragon's voice actor recorded a spoken word song called Kakame no Senkusha? I hope not, because it's pretty bad. Dragon's voice is not suited for music in any way, shape, or form, and this may be controversial, but I legitimately think it may be the worst song ever recorded by a One Piece voice actor. And I'm including Damaro Black's We Were in that as well. But look, having the worst song is also very fitting for Dragon's worst title. And even though we're not aware of Dragon's bounty yet, the entirety of the first worst have a combined bounty total of at least 13,452,000,000 berries. So they're currently worth more than the entire true worst generation. But most shockingly, all 7 members are still active. Whether they've risen to the top or simply kept afloat in the great backwash of existence, this whole generation is ready and actively going to participate in the eventual climax of One Piece. The One Piece world is home to all sorts of crazy life forms, from south birds to north birds to east birds, and also the birds from the other direction. But nothing really gives you the full scope of this world until you dive into the deep seas. The One Piece world is home to some of the most terrifying sea monsters in all of media. The reason why sailing in the Grand Line is so dangerous isn't so much because of the Marines or the pirates or the unpredictable weather, it's because at any given moment, you could be eaten by a creature hundreds of times your size, which in and of itself could be eaten by a creature thousands of times your size, and that one can be eaten as well by a creature, look, you get the idea. There's always a bigger fish, culminating in a staggering godlike entity of unknown power. These are the most dangerous sea monsters in One Piece. And we're going to begin off the coast of Alabasta with these happy dugongs. Do not, however, let this hap fool you, as they are trained kung fu dugongs. No sea life in One Piece is to be underestimated. None. In fact, the goofier it looks, the more you should probably stay away from it. A point which is proven perfectly by the Kung Fu Dugongs. Roughly a third as tall as the average human, but born with innate martial arts abilities that surpass any untrained human and also many of those who are trained, and they could be particularly dangerous as they always travel in packs. However, they also live by a strict code of honor, which means they prefer one-on-one fights. Also, once defeated, a Dugong will pledge themselves to the one who bested them. However, despite their battle lust, they're usually quite friendly though. Remembering that the concept of friendly to a Kung Fu Dugong means engaging in consistent violence. The Dugongs populate warmer areas, however within colder climates you are liable to encounter a super penguin. The most famous one in the series is named Camel, which Kuzan uses to travel instead of his bike post time skip. And really they're not too big in the grand scheme of things, but also remember that Kuzan is almost 3 meters tall, so this penguin is still massive compared to your average person. Also, they come with a pretty big warning. Even though they constantly act adorable, they don't like being called cute, and if you do call them cute, then they will pretty seriously mess you up. But even then, super penguins are minuscule compared to what else is out there, such as the voracious fighting fish, which are many times larger than a human and already larger than 99.9% of all living things in reality. Unlike the Dugongs, they are both ferocious and willing to work in groups. In fact, it is next to impossible to cross any water inhabited by fighting fish, unless you're some sort of ocean-faring Giga Chat pirate king and or flamingo being person man. Within their ranks, they also have a quote boss class fighting fish, which, while smaller than average, are far more intelligent and far more deadly. And actually, Old Mate Dellinger is part fighting fish, but specifically a fishman style fighting fish rather than the core breed. The latter of which would be weird because it would imply that a human once mated with a fish. They live primarily around Dressrosa and are said to lack any natural predators. However, this is almost certainly due to their proximity to land, because venturing further out into the sea would certainly definitely put fighting fish back on the menu, boys. For an example of that, I bet that all of you insect haters thought that this video about sea monsters would be safe. Well, you're wrong. Because here is a giant aquatic centipede, and yes, I know that centipedes and millipedes and myriapods, but let's be real, to the people afraid of insects, the exact classification doesn't really matter. There is a bit of discrepancy about their size. I think in the anime they're portrayed as much bigger than the manga. Either way, still massive though. Roughly the same size as a large ship such as the Thousand Sunny. Very little is known about them other than they exist, and that's probably because most people who encounter them don't live to report their results. In fact, from here on out, every creature we encounter has the power to sink a large vessel with ease. Which takes us to the sea beasts, which are probably the most commonly cited aquatic life forms in One Piece, which isn't a good thing. You do not want to see them. A sea beast can be identified quite easily as anything with the prefix sea, followed by an animal that does not belong in the sea, such as a sea rabbit, sea lion, sea bear, sea hippo, which I guess hippos do kind of belong in water, but not this much water. And of course, sea cows like Momo, who we actually have an oddly detailed biology of. And if we zoom in on the stomach, you can see the bones of lesser sea life, such as sharks and even small whales. Also, sea cows in particular have a superior digestive system, making them immune to poisons, thus granting them a practically omnivorous lifestyle. These creatures are colossal in nature. A sea cow, for example, is 36 meters tall and weighs a whopping 16 tons. And a lot of general sea beasts take on the characteristics of their fusion creature, meaning that some are hyper-aggressive, whilst others are just devastatingly playful. That's the basic level of sea beast anyway. If you make it far enough into the New World, then you may even encounter sea beast weapons. These are augmented, weaponized sea beasts under the control of Dr. Vegapunk and employed primarily to guard Egghead Island. Most of them are the same size as regular sea beasts. However, amongst their ranks is a particularly fearsome creature known as the Mecha Shark, big enough to comfortably swallow large ships, and even the large Vegaforce mecha looks quite humble compared to it. The point is though, in One Piece you can't just worry about sea beasts. You've also got to worry about cyborg sea beasts and also zombies. Taking a huge step up is Oars, and he's a bit of a rarity here because ancient giants, no, they're not technically sea monsters, but we do have to make an exception for Oars, because he was known as Oars the Continent Puller, clocking in at 67 meters tall and weighing 102 tons. So he did spend quite a lot of time in the sea pulling those there continents, even though continents don't exist in the One Piece world apart from the Red Line, but who knows, maybe that's because Oars pulled them all apart. Back in his day though, you would definitely rather run into a more standard sea monster than Oars. Allegedly, he was a barbaric warrior who created a nation of villains, so realistically you would probably have a better chance of surviving against a sea beast. I think a lot of people are shocked to discover that Oars is only 67 meters tall, not because that isn't absolutely massive, but because even that is nothing compared to the truly big sea life. As an example, here's a Kraken, a very classic sea monster that dwarfs anything we've discussed so far, carrying an average width of 300 meters. The primary one we've seen in the series is Tsurume, and that's for good reason, because apparently Krakens are native to North Blue, and Tsurume was brought into the Grand Line by the new Fishman pirates. Despite their size and reputation, Krakens are actually quite friendly and docile. And the reason why Tsurume was so aggressive is because Hody had kidnapped his Kraken family and was forcing him to obey them. Specifically, Hody kidnapped Tsurume's brother, which is something that Luffy immediately identified with, having two older brothers himself. And Tsurume is not the only gargantuan sea creature that Luffy has made friends with, or more accurately, a rival in the form of Laboon, an island whale which on average grow to a height of 400 meters, making them by far the largest species of whale in One Piece. So massive that they actually contain other giant sea monsters inside them. When the Straw Hats were swallowed by Laboon, they encountered a great king squid, quite fearsome in its own right, but nothing compared to island whales. We also have a detailed diagram of Laboon, whose body contains a very complex series of tunnels and various mechanics installed, assumedly by Crocus, as a way of saving people who Laboon decides to eat out of sheer annoyance. And they're also extremely intelligent, but at the same time extremely dangerous because they mostly travel in pods. So a lot of the damage they cause is collateral, because when you've got a large group of 400-meter whales roaming the seas, it's just not going to end well for anything in their path. So all of this is probably making you think that it's just better to stay put on an island. Well, you're not safe there either. This is the Island Eater. 715 meters of height units with 120 tons of weight, and as its name implies, it is literally large enough to consume islands. However, as a side effect of its digestive system, it also creates islands. In fact, there is one island in the series confirmed to exist exactly through this mechanism. Its name is Nanimonai Island, island, and it was crafted from the remains of another island that had been excreted by the Island Eater. Nanimonai Island was so big that even the giants Dory and Broggy mistook it for an actual island and landed on it. And I think this also goes to show the unbelievable power of the giants who were able to dismiss the Island Eater in one blow. Oh, and there's a common misconception. The Island Eater is often mistaken for a Sea King, even by me, but they definitely belong in a whole different category of their own. Sea Kings are the true big boys of the world. On average, they're approximately 5,000 meters long and various widths, with almost nothing in this world being larger than them. Emphasis on the word almost. Sea Kings are so fearsome that 2 entire stretches of water are practically unsailable because that's where they mostly live. These are the calm belt stretches that sandwich the Grand Line. And groups of Sea Kings are so devastating that together they form the power of a literal ancient weapon. The ability of the ancient weapon Poseidon is to command the Sea Kings, thus implying that they are capable of unparalleled and devastating destruction. However, they do have a weakness. For example, the Yuta from Amazon Lily contain a special poison that makes them much less tasty for a Sea King, and also allegedly Bananawani, the banana gators, are natural predators of Sea Kings, despite being absolutely minuscule compared to them. The other notable thing about Sea Kings is that they are exceptionally intelligent and can communicate with each other much like how humans can. And this communication can even be understood by those who can hear the voice of all things. And from what we've heard so far, Sea Kings are intrinsically tied to the mystery of the Void Century and Joy Boy. In fact, Sea Kings at this point know more about the Void Century than almost any human, bar say Silvers Ray Lee, and they are almost certainly old enough to have lived during the Void Century itself. As a side note, Sea Kings do have smaller, more sleek versions that roam around the lesser seas, such as the Lord of the Coast, who is the smallest known Sea King to date, but most of them are the colossal versions. But even then, there are still bigger things that you can encounter in this world, which will be known to those who sail around the area of Gyre Island, as it is quite common to see monstrously large shadow creatures. Now, as readers and watchers, we know that these shadows are cast by the Shandian tribe members of Skypiea. However, if you're just an average person in this world, then seeing these would be one of the most terror-inducing sights. A series of giant silhouettes, impossible to quantify in terms of size or power. If I saw something like this, then I would never set out to sea again. And yes, we know that these particular shadows are harmless, but some of them are definitely not that. One of, if not the largest sea-based entity in One Piece, is the mysterious creature that inhabits the Florian Triangle. A creature we know nothing about, except that it's implied to be responsible for the disappearances of ships in this area long before Gecko Moria decided to make this space his home. Now, physically, it bears some resemblance to certain Japanese umibozu, which are mythological sea monsters said to drown very unfortunate sailors. And it has, at the very least, 2 sinister red eyes that can pierce the thick fog that has kept the creature masked from the world for, well, I don't know, quite possibly as long as it's lived, which could be hundreds, if not thousands of years. All we know right now is that this creature is completely unique and unlike anything we've seen or will see in the future. I mean, its sheer size is just insane. It makes Thriller Bark, which is literally a whole island, look tiny, look like nothing compared to it. But even that thing I just said is not the largest sea monster in this world. The largest sea creature is in fact an elephant. Zunesha is a Naitami Enorida elephant who is over 1,000 years old and dwarfs every single creature on this planet. Every creature, not just sea creatures. Zunesha stands at a mind-blowing 35 kilometers tall, which means that it is the only living thing tall enough to both touch the sea floor and be able to exist in the white sea far, far above. And it's also big enough that it carries an entire civilization on its back. Zunesha is also very smart and can communicate in a manner similar to that of Sea Kings. And also, Zunesha is subject to a big in-world controversy. 800 years ago, Zunesha allegedly committed a crime and was sentenced to walk the seas for all eternity. And recently, Zunesha claimed to have been a comrade of the legendary Joy Boy and was the one who confirmed to us that Luffy had inherited the will and powers of Joy Boy upon the emergence of Gear 5th. And so Zunesha is the biggest boy that One Piece has to offer. And let me know in the comments, what crime do you think this elephant committed? These are the 9 rarest abilities in One Piece. These are powers so unique that they have nothing to do with devil fruits, nothing to do with Haki, and each ability can only be used by a single individual within the One Piece world. So we One Piece fans often make a big fuss about devil fruit awakenings and how rare they are, when realistically, they are far too common to be included in a video of rare abilities. So is Conqueror's Haki, and even the Voice of All Things. 3 people use that. There's too many, that's not rare. This world isn't governed by one or two broad power systems, and if you dig deeply enough, you'll find that each and every individual is capable of crafting something borderline magical. Like say Miss Goldenweek and her Colors Traps power. This is an ability so strange and frankly unexplainable that it often gets mistaken for a devil fruit power, which is that through the sheer force of art, Miss Goldenweek is able to influence people's emotions, actions, and even whole personalities with shocking ease. The first use of which was when Luffy stepped into Miss Goldenweek's Black of Betrayal, which made him not want to save his friends who were about to die imminently. But she can make you feel or do literally anything. Send you into fits of laughter, soothe you into an indifferent pacifism, or even make you infuriated to the point where she can force you to fight. All through the painfully simple application of paint on a target. And to the best of our knowledge, the paint itself contains no special properties. There's nothing magical or technologically advanced about it. Really, like most great works of art, it's all about how the artist wields the paint to conjure an emotion in those viewing the work, or in this case, I suppose, experiencing the work. It's almost inconceivable that this isn't a devil fruit ability. And this could be like a Kinemon kind of situation, where Miss Goldenweek has accidentally eaten a devil fruit without knowing it, and just believes that this power is natural. But the author of One Piece, Eiichiro Oda, did confirm in the SBS of Volume 23 that this is not the case, and that Miss Goldenweek's skills can more accurately be described as a form of hypnosis. And it's also implied that those of particularly strong minds would be immune, or if not immune, at least less affected by the Colors Traps, which is why it was particularly devastating to have this ability used on the less than mentally sound Monkey D. Luffy. Although, to Luffy's credit, he has the strongest willpower of probably anyone in One Piece, so if Colors Traps work on him, then I see no reason why it wouldn't affect any Emperor of the Sea or even a Pirate King. Especially since one Emperor already has a very similar ability that he uses on himself. Emperor of the Sea Kaido is able to access an exclusive suite of abilities known as Shuron-Hake, which I'd like to emphasize has nothing to do with his devil fruit or haki. So the literal translation of Shuron-Hake is Sake Dragon 8 Trigrams, which is why we stick to Shuron-Hake because that's not particularly helpful. But this is Kaido's take on the drunken fist style of martial arts, where he becomes heavily intoxicated and is able to rapidly switch between 8 different forms according to whatever arbitrary mood swings he's having at the time. So because the title says 8 trigrams, I would assume that Kaido has 8 forms. However, in reality, we've only seen 7. For the sake of simplicity, we have Depressed Kaido, Crying Kaido, Rage Kaido, Drunken Beggar Kaido, Drunken Thief Kaido, Bloodthirsty Drunk Kaido, and Happy Kaido. That last one there is actually very similar to Luffy's form in Gear 5th. Kaido physically cannot stop laughing and acts in a very cartoonish way. Now, you might notice that some of these forms sound a little bit more threatening than the others, which is very much the key to this ability. Half of the modes are designed to put the opponent off guard while still maintaining a strong defense, with the other half of them being highly deadly specialty switches. In the manga, it was like Luffy was fighting 7 different opponents at once, all tagging in and out between each other. Luffy had so much difficulty keeping up with Kaido's mood swings, which gave Kaido the opportunity to get some key damage in. Now, the obvious disadvantage of this ability is that Kaido himself cannot control it. He gets drunk and then the fight becomes a glorified game of roulette. But it does make him stronger. These forms actively increase his haki. And my theory as to why is because it brings out Kaido's most powerful emotions, and with emotions comes willpower. So what we have are Kaido's peak emotions and his peak willpower surfacing. These moods do also interact with Kaido's Zoan fruit and morph him physically in some cases into bizarre hybrid forms that are inaccessible to him while sober. And I do think it's sad that we never got to see this Kaido go up against Gear 5th Luffy, because that would have been pure insanity. But the next ability might be one of the most unique powers not just in One Piece but in manga in general, and it's Lao Ji's Gyoken, which because it's Lao Ji, he always has to put a sharp emphasis on the Ji part of Gyoken, and it's a very bizarre form of combat designed for the geriatric physique. What I mean by that is that this is an ability you learn and train for as a youthful person in preparation to wield it during your old age. To be clear, there are no benefits of using Gyoken when you're young, because it allows Lao Ji to store and conserve his muscle power during his youth in order to wield it once his body has withered and aged. It's like the combat equivalent of saving for retirement. Every combat paycheck, you put some of that combat power away. Ideally, it then compounds with some sort of combat interest rate. And then eventually, over time, it becomes a big nest egg and you are set to live to death. My personal favorite Gyoken technique is actually called Battle Insurance, where Lao Ji withdraws large quantities of power that he'd saved up in his youth should he come across a particularly dire situation. And also, Gyoken gives him a sort of enhanced control over the concept of his own existence in general. There's one point during the Dressrosa arc where Lao Ji actually dies mid-fight against Sai, but he's able to become consciously briefly aware of his death in soul form and return to his body, which is played as a gag in the manga, but the dude still did it. And it's not an unprecedented power either. Brook can do the same thing just via magical fruit. But I love the concept of Gyoken because it means that Laoji was a man who was born to be old. His whole youth was about the pursuit of being elderly. And it's a fun, quirky power that I wish we could see in a few more One Piece characters. Laoji, of course, appears during the Dressrosa arc, which is something of a gold mine for these super rare, unique powers. Because the setup is that Doflamingo was holding a tournament in the Corridor Coliseum with Ace's form and Devil Fruit being offered as a prize. So it attracts people from all over the world to compete for it, but most importantly, because the prize is a Devil Fruit, it primarily attracts people who are not already Devil Fruit users, which is why we get this amazing showcase of niche abilities that normally wouldn't pop up, such as the always forgotten Jiao Kun Do used by Blue Gilly, which is quite a trippy power because it involves Blue Gilly moving his legs so quickly that they create after images and make it nigh on impossible to predict where the actual attack is going to land. This probably sounds pretty simple compared to a lot of the stuff we have examined and some stuff we are going to examine, but this kind of speed, it's out of this world. Even with the insanely swift characters like Kizaru or Sanji, we've not seen anything on the level of what Blue Gilly demonstrated here, and it is arguably the single greatest demonstration of combat speed in the series currently. And the only reason why we don't know exactly how effective the ability is happens to be because of another stupidly rare power used by one person in the Corridor Coliseum, by which I'm referring to Elisabello II's King Punch, which is one of the most mind-boggling mystery powers in the world. Dagama the Tactician describes this power as follows. My King Elisabello II was born with a living weapon of mass destruction. The punches he unleashes from his powerful physique are astonishing to behold. He left the world speechless when he smashed through the fortress of an enemy with one blow. There's just one drawback to his power. In order to throw a single punch, he requires a full hour of heavy concentration and warming up. It's his treasured heirloom, a weapon that can only be unleashed once in any battle. The King Punch, a weapon devastating enough to sink one of the 4 emperors should it land squarely. So an attack powerful enough to take down an emperor under the right conditions. Those are some pretty big words. And it's always worth questioning how much of a reliable narrator Dagama is. But at the very least, this is an attack on par with what the 4 emperors are capable of conjuring. Because when Elisabello II unleashed King Punch, it was one of the single most powerful attacks we'd ever seen, and still have ever seen to this day, actually. It's quite comparable to something like Kaido's Bora Breath. The main difference being that Kaido can use Bora Breath seemingly infinitely, whereas Elisabello is restricted to 1 King Punch per battle. But even then, to have access to the power of an emperor when you're this random king dude with no Devil Fruit and no Haki is almost more impressive. Bora Breath was given to Kaido as part of his Devil Fruit, but with Elisabello, this is just pure, concentrated focus strength. And very mysteriously, a power that no one can replicate. An ability that Elisabello was born with, and I can't imagine that discovering this ability for the first time went particularly well for anyone. It sounds like a very messy and destructive childhood. It's definitely not the messiest raw power though. That title most certainly belongs to Wanzi, who wields the hilarious but kind of gross Ramen Kenpo ability. Sometimes powers are rare because you need to be born with them, like say King Elisabello, but sometimes powers are rare simply because, well, absolutely no one else wants to use them. Ramen Kenpo involves Wanzi wielding absolutely gigantic, pre-prepared ramen noodles in an assortment of combative techniques, which Wanzi tends to call spanks, and he's even able to pilot a suit of noodle armor which Wanzi describes as an edible combat uniform, everyone's dream weapon. And shockingly enough, this ability isn't just a joke, and it is implied by Wanzi that this is a special power that only he has access to, or only he wants to have access to. As in order to study Ramen Kenpo as a martial art, you need to learn the special ingredient, which is being able to control the ramen noodles at will. It's almost like what CP9's Kumadori does with manipulating his hair, although that is an application of Seimei-Kikan, which is an ability that wasn't rare enough for this video because 2 people use it, Kumadori and Rob Lucci. But Ramen Kenpo is quite similar, just with noodles. The key difference is that Seimei-Kikan is all about controlling your body and your life force. That's why Kumadori can do stuff like expertly manipulate his hair into hands. But with Wanzi, it appears that he has discovered a genuine method to manipulate whatever force or substance lies within those super chunky noodles. If you think about it purely from an academic standpoint, it's very impressive. But if you go further than that, and remember that Wanzi once used this to shoot noodles out of his nose under the guise of an attack called Ramen Beam, then it does lose its academic credibility somewhat. When it comes down to it, I think that if someone really wanted to for some reason, then they could figure out the secret of noodle manipulation and wield Ramen Kenpo. But no one wants to, and that's why this ability is unique to Wanzi and Wanzi alone. However, just as a bit of a Wanzi status update, after his defeat on the Sea Train, he started dating a lovely woman who he is seen proposing to in One Piece film Gold. So good on him. And it should serve as encouragement to all of you. If the guy who shoots noodles through his nose can put in the effort and get the girl of his dreams, then so can you. Maybe. I don't guarantee that, actually. Especially if you're dreaming of Nami, because she's fictional, but to her fictional credit, she has access to a power that no one else could even dream of, being the art of weather. So this is probably the most complicated ability in this video, because it goes through a series of different iterations as One Piece goes on. But essentially, Nami is able to create and manipulate the weather around her due to a device known as the Climatact, the latest version of which is a fusion product of Nami's knowledge combined with Usopp and Franky's engineering. So it took three geniuses from different fields to come together and give birth to this weather stick. And even then, not just anyone can use it. The reason why this ability is unique to Nami is because you need her mental encyclopedia of global weather to even begin your journey in mastering the art of weather. So the Climatact Nami currently wields is called the Sorcery Climatact, because we've reached the point where a lot of what she does is just indistinguishable from elemental magic. And what also helps is that it's inhabited by Zeus, a piece of soul cloud that significantly amps up the damage capabilities of the Climatact when it comes to lightning-based attacks. And you know, we did credit Elisabello for having an Emperor level attack, and we're going to give the same credit to Nami. Because with Zeus, Nami can conjure lightning blasts on the same scale as that of the Emperor Big Mom, which very much makes her one of the most heavy-hitting Straw Hats, judging by single attacks alone. But this miracle fusion of science, engineering, and anthropomorphic cloud friend can only exist in the hands of Nami. For our next rarest ability, it's difficult to classify whether this is a nice hidden power or a heavily detrimental hidden curse. Going back to Dressrosa, we need to address the existence that is Cavendish, a lovely boy who harbors a dark split persona known as Hakuba, who emerges as a combination of three conditions held by Cavendish, being narcolepsy, sleepwalking, and dissociative identity disorder. His narcolepsy allows his other identity, Hakuba, to come out, and his sleepwalking allows Hakuba to move. Although I think that just labeling it as sleepwalking very much undersells what's going on here. When Hakuba is out, Cavendish's face physically changes color, and his combat abilities skyrocket, particularly in the areas of speed and precision, which combined with Hakuba's innately bloodthirsty nature means that Cavendish has to be very careful, because if he falls asleep in the wrong place, then Hakuba is going to go on a bit of a slicing spree. So there's a tale of one of Hakuba's incidents from the Rommel Kingdom. Apparently his attacks were so swift that the people thought that they were being cut down by the wind, because they just couldn't see what was obliterating all of them, which earned Hakuba the epithet of Kamaitachi of Rommel, which literally means the sickle weasel of Rommel, which I'm not sure quite captures the nigh-on demonic nature of Hakuba. Although, to the anime's credit, this information was revealed in episode 666, so that was nice and thematic. And this is one of the many incidences that brings up the vague idea of demons within One Piece. They don't get addressed very often, but there are these incidents every now and then that we simply cannot ignore. Another example of a Hakuba-like state is whenever Charlotte Lin Ling gets thrown into a hunger tantrum and becomes this demonic entity that isn't too dissimilar from Hakuba at all. And it's very possible that there's a presence living within both of them. And they're not the only ones either, because the Straw Hat swordsman Roanoa Zoro, often referred to as a demon and now the self-professed king of hell, is the user of another unique ability known as Ashura. Zoro is the main protagonist who we've been following ever since chapter 3, and Ashura is a technique we've known about since chapter 417, which was published 18 years ago now, and we still have no understanding of exactly what this is. Ashura involves Zoro accessing Nine Sword style, where Zoro appears to grow 4 extra arms and 2 extra heads, bringing his sword total to a mighty 9. And the biggest mystery has always been, is Zoro physically manifesting all of these extra bits? Or is it just an illusion he's conjuring? But no matter what the answer is, it doesn't prevent the next question, which is how. During the raid on Onigashima, Kaido revealed that Zoro has Conqueror's Haki, and that's how he was able to injure him, which appeared to imply that Ashura was the result of said Haki. But at the same time, that would mean that Zoro has been using Conqueror's Haki ever since Enies Lobby, and as much as my Zoro fanboy heart is well and truly prepared to embrace that, it just doesn't feel like quite the right answer. Especially since no other character in the series has ever used Conqueror's Haki in a way that even comes close to this. Conqueror's Haki tends to have a very uniform effect, and Zoro here would be getting a detention because he's arrived at Conqueror's Haki school out of uniform. So one idea is that Ashura and Nine Sword style is granted to Zoro through the cursed Kitetsu blade he wields, lords, whilst another is that he could be harboring and accessing demonic powers in the same vein as Big Mom and Cavendish. All I know is that we've been waiting for the answer to this mystery for 18 years, and I still don't expect it to be solved anytime soon. But if you want to be the first to find out, then don't forget to subscribe to this channel for consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed. Why are you watching this? I warned you. So here's a taste of what you're gonna get in this video. In this video, we will reveal 4 hidden characters, answer 3 penis questions, detail 2 Eiichiro Oda love letters, as well as finally discover the speed limit of the Okama Way, discover how Oda's obsession with one pop star changed the entire course of One Piece, and reveal Whitebeard's intimate fixation on a certain item. By which I mean something I can't say in the first 2 minutes of a video or it'll get demonetized. But this is all canon. There is something about Whitebeard that you probably didn't even notice, but once you do, you cannot unsee it. And like everything else in this video, it was confirmed as canon by the author himself. So as most seasoned fictional pirate enjoyers will know, Eiichiro Oda tells the story of One Piece through 2 mediums. One is the manga, and the other is the companion pieces to the manga, specifically the SBS question segments. In fact, I often complain that Oda tells far too much of the story in these companion pieces. But something you will have never heard about in any other video is the sheer amount of useless information that Oda dumps into these glorified story toilets. Whether you like it or not, you're gonna learn something today. And I promise that this knowledge will do nothing except take up valuable mental real estate that you could have used to house something useful. So this is your fault, and let's begin. In the SBS of Volume 19, Eiichiro Oda is posed a very serious question. Oda-sensei, I found something rather surprising about the delivery man on pages 117 to 118 of Volume 18. It says hard-boiled on his t-shirt, but on page 69, those are the same people, right? And his t-shirt says full-boiled. What's up with him? Tell me! Very well, I shall tell you. This guy's name is Mr. Mello, and he has a surprisingly detailed backstory. He was one of the Baroque Works billions who killed Mr. 11 after he was captured by Smoker. But Mr. Mello has a character arc to go on here which all started 4 years ago. He and his fellow billions were carting dance powder in Nanohana. The cart broke and then they ran like the assorted cowards they are. But very importantly, if you zoom in on his shirt, the kanji says half-boiled. Meanwhile, when he makes his reappearance 4 years later, it says full-boiled, or fledged in the Viz translation, and this is what is known as character development. Mr. Mello then makes the mistake of trying to capture Ace, and he destroys all of them with a fire fist, thus I suppose making him boiled over and completing his 4-year character arc. Congratulations, you now know Mr. Mello's full story arc. But as a result of knowing this, you've probably forgotten how to cook. But if not for these segments, we would never know about hidden gems like Mr. Mello, nor would we get to ask Oda questions such as, on Klahador's clothing, there's a symbol that looks like poop. Does it stand for poop, or does it have some other meaning? To which Oda just replied, it's poop. And along the same lines, what happened to the key Choo Choo swallowed in Volume 2? And what the reader is referring to here is Chapter 12, where Choo Choo swallows the key to Luffy's cage, assumedly as an act of retribution because Luffy poked him in the eyes. And just in case you've ever wondered what became of that key, well, it came out, shiny and brown. Of course, Oda isn't always accommodating when it comes to weird questions. In Volume 7, a reader asked, does Shanks like me? And Oda said, I don't care. And on that note, it's time for penis question number 1. Oda-sensei, since Luffy is a Gomu human, does that mean his penis can stretch too? I don't know why penis is in quotation marks, actually. But the answer is that yes, it can. I couldn't help but notice something. On page 137 of Volume 15, the woman appears to have spring onions in her basket. 3 of them. But the same lady later appears on page 162. Is it me, or does she have a bunch more of them? If she's got so many, does it mean they're having roasted onions for dinner or onion stew? Just tell me what she was going to cook. So a truly fascinating discovery here. Drum Island, typically thought of as Chopper's arc, actually has a spring onion or shallot depending on your you. It has a spring onion subplot that goes unnoticed by far too many people. And this woman in question is named Negikuma Maria, which basically translates as Spring Onion Bear Maria. She's 45 years years old, born on November 14th, and her English voice actor is Wendy Powell, who also voices Miss Merry Christmas. So she's sort of like the go-to animal woman fusion voice. But what exactly is Negikuma Maria's endgame here? Well, whilst the Straw Hats and everyone else worked to free Drum Island from Warpole, according to Oda, Negikuma Maria was working in tandem to gather ingredients in order to bake a spring onion cake, which I'm sure went about as well as it sounds. As a bonus useless fact, in the 4Kids dub, Negikuma Maria was named Big Mama, which would have caused quite the confusing situation if Big Mom ever appeared. Because that's two big mothers and that's too many, there can only be one. Question: if Luffy is 7,200 funky Gomu Gomus, does that mean that Sanji is about 8,500 funky Ero Eros? Answer: oh no, not at all. He can get at least 930 fairy tale Ero Eros. There is no context to this at all. You're not missing any information. That's just how this exchange went. Question: is there a mirror on Alvida's ship? The implication here being that Alvida has perhaps misjudged her attractiveness due to a lack of evidence. Answer: something tells me she doesn't have a mirror. And this absurdly obscure piece of information is referenced in the live action One Piece because the very first shot of Alvida is looking at herself in a full body mirror. Question: does Sanji-san like to say shit? Answer: no. He loves to say shit. Glad we clarified that. But from time to time, readers also have a wide variety of helpful suggestions for One Piece. You know, to take the pressure off Oda from being the sole creative all the time. Suggestions such as: Oda-sensei, I thought of a great move. 1. Luffy stretches out his arm. 2. Zoro cuts his arm off. 3. The arm shoots away. Note, the move can only be used twice. And speaking of combat, in the early days of One Piece, Oda actually used to get a lot of power scaling questions. And one of them was the classic flat out who's stronger, Zoro or Sanji? If Zoro and Sanji had a serious fight, who would win? Zoro beat Mr. One, so he's stronger, right? And now this right here was a bit of a tricky situation for Mr. Oda-san, who handled it with all of the poise and grace we've come to expect of him by claiming that he misheard the question as, if Zoro and Sanji had a dick fight, who would win? And then refuses to answer due to the uncouth nature of the question. However, this intentional misunderstanding is because the Japanese word for serious is gachinko. However, gachinko means dick, and Japanese is a very, very dick language, which might explain all of the questions such as, can Buggy split his down there? And the answer is yes, he can. And now for a segment I like to call Weird Letters to Eiichiro Oda. How are ya, Odachi? I know how much you must like getting butt naked, so this must be a favorite season for you. Yes. I just love getting completely naked. In the summertime, after I take a bath, I just run straight outside. And when the girls' softball team running, this is such a weird letter. And when the girls' softball team running on the sidewalk looks over at me, they say, yep, it's really summer now. Heartwarming. That is a genuine letter that a fan sent Oda, and Oda proceeded to publish in volume 25 of the second highest selling comic book in human history. Good stuff. These letters often do get a bit weirdly personal though. I have a secret question to discuss with you, Master Oda. Brackets, this is a normal letter. Closed brackets. That's good to know. Please times 10 tell me your home address. I hope this finds you in good health. Seems like a perfectly reasonable request. Although I don't know how Oda's love wife would feel about this because we've also had a letter from her as well. Welcome home, my love. Would you like dinner? Or take a bath? Or maybe you'd rather have... And that's where this letter ends, signed from Love Wife 2. We have yet to hear from Love Wife 1. She seems much less inclined to publicly disclose her details in One Piece volumes. But also, aliens. Salutations, I am an Earthlian. And then there's a little asterisk there, which defines an Earthlian as a half Earthling, half alien. I am an Earthlian who lives in the same house that Usopp's father Yasopp's friend's brother's girlfriend lived in a long time ago. And Oda actually responds to this one, but he just says, wow. So there's a lot of these, but there is one letter that was very revealing, and it tells us something about Oda that would go on to greatly influence One Piece. And this time, I'm not joking, this is actually relevant, sort of. To Odachi, I am your betrothed. When are we going to be married? Should it be November 1st? We're going to kiss in the marriage ceremony, right? I'm so nervous, kiss. Actually, I'm Nami Amoro's little sister. Now that is the last line that we're concerned with, because Nami Amuro is a name that you might be familiar with if you've watched the One Piece anime. So firstly, this letter was sent in 1999. Not only that, it was actually sent before the anime had even begun airing, which is interesting because Nami Amuro would go on on to sing the openings Fight Together and Hope in 2011 and 2017 respectively. And also she had a special track called Black Makeup for the One Piece TV special Adventure of Nebulandia, which is the one where Foxy briefly joins the Straw Hats. But Namie Amuro also had a special animation featuring her interacting with the Straw Hats. All of this is to say that I think that Eiichiro Oda might have had a bit of a thing for Namie Amuro, which may have been known by readers, hence this letter trying to entice Oda by claiming to be Namie Amuro's little sister. Now, one really fun challenge Oda undertook was when he was asked to draw all of the characters with his left hand, which resulted in this Nami, Zoro, and Luffy, which at the time of this recording is live-action actress Emily Rudd's Twitter profile picture. But having gotten a taste of delicious power, readers soon thoroughly abused Oda's hospitality. Shortly after, Oda was asked to draw all of the characters with his foot, which resulted in this. Guess which character that is. And this also proved so popular that Oda was then asked to draw the characters with his mouth, which actually isn't bad at all. I think that worked out much better than the foot. Also, in the early days of SBS segments, readers basically dumped their chores on Oda. For example, there was a student who needed to make a class schedule, and then Oda just went and made a class schedule for him. And when alerted to the fact that this schedule wouldn't work for all schools, Oda said to send him the specifics and he would adjust it as necessary. And sometimes you can really feel the passion in Oda's answers, because sometimes he goes absolutely above and beyond to explain incredibly minor details about his world. When someone asked what the pistols in One Piece are called, not only did Oda reveal their names, but he even drew a detailed diagram of exactly how a flintlock pistol functions, like a textbook. But then again, sometimes people also write in to just complain. I just want to say this to Mr. 8. You're a disgrace to the saxophone. What's with that posture? Your embouchure is pathetic. And at least wear a strap. Think about what I said. Now go. Sometimes the SBS is kind of like the YouTube comment section before YouTube existed. Then again, in volume 23, another hidden gem is unlocked. It was noticed that in chapter 206, Tashigi strikes down a man who has I Love Miss Valentine on the back of his jacket. According to Oda, this is because Baroque Works has over 2,000 members, as well as a series of fan clubs dedicated to the upper numbered and named agents. Miss Valentine is only one. But to join a Baroque Works fan club, you need to send your name, age, and address to the Whiskey Peak AFC Agent Fan Club headquarters, which you can't do that anymore because Zoro destroyed it. But we were not prepared for just how far down this particular rabbit hole we were about to go, because there's also a sub-question of how Baroque Works agents take vacations. Remembering that this organization has existed for like at least half a decade by the time we meet them, so it's a fully established corporate hierarchy with paid leave. Oda joked that Crocodile sends his employees to the Winter Festival in Hokkaido, but later corrected that he needs to book flights and vacations for each member separately, since no one agent is allowed to know who any of the others are except for your partner. So that's up to 2,000 individual holidays that Sir Crocodile is booking and managing per year for his criminal enterprise. What a solid CEO. This is why he's the management behind Cross Guild. But the Baroque Works curiosities continue. If Mr. 7 became Mr. 6, what would happen to his face? Another very important question, as Mr. 7's face is designed entirely around the number 7. His nose, his eyebrows, his shoes, and even the gun. The latter two I know aren't part of the face, let's forget about that. But his identity is glued to the number 7. So as a result, Oda was forced to draw Mr. 7 if he ever got a promotion to Mr. 6. Also, fun fact is most people do now know he was not the original Mr. 7. The original was killed by Zoro before the series began and made an appearance in live-action One Piece. But recently it was revealed that Oda actually made a full proper sketch of the original Mr. 7 to make it easier for production, which I think is really cool. Oda has also been asked on multiple occasions what species he is. The speculation has been published that Oda is a dog, an alien, and a hippo. In fact, one reader asked if Oda wanted to raise a hippo that the reader had found on the side of the road. Oda, however, declined this offer. Question: Hey, Oda-sensei, when Dr. Hiroluck got naked, why did there just so happen to be snow obscuring the view of his most special area? Answer: if it didn't just so happen to obscure the view, you'd see his weenie. That is the exact quote. Eiichiro Oda used the word weenie. And questions like this are, unsurprisingly, a bit of a trend. How is it that the spikes from Miss Doublefinger's Toge fruit can also grow from outside her body? Brackets, her clothes, that is. Answer: huh? Are you referring to the fact that spikes would rip the clothes? If I did that, wouldn't this become an extraordinarily erotic manga? And if I did that, then I'd have to draw it that way on book covers. So then everyone would be super embarrassed when trying to buy it at the bookstore. You want that? And to answer Oda's question, yes, I do think the reader wants that. But let's talk about Whitebeard now. now. I made some big promises at the beginning of this video, and after this, you will not see him the same way again. A reader spotted something rather curious in chapter 234, which is the introduction of Whitebeard. However, around Whitebeard is what can only be described as a harem of nurses, all wearing leopard print tights. Standard hospital issue, I'm sure, but the reader essentially inquires as to whether the nurses in leopard tights is, how shall we say, Whitebeard's specific intimate trigger, to which Oda said yes. Whitebeard's wish/mandate was that all of his palliative care nurses were dressed like this. Oda also goes on to add, I hear that there are more hospitals where nurses wear pants. That's sad, I'm gonna cry now. And now for the question we've all been waiting for. What's the speed limit on the Okama Way? Well, according to Oda, the law states that if you go over 300 mascaras per hour, then you can expect to be musk-arrested. So I hope that you've gained absolutely nothing from this video. I warned you with the title and the thumbnail that you did not need to watch it. If you're still watching it, why? Let me know why. Because I have over 1,000 videos with actual One Piece information that you can and should know. But this video was just dedicated to the useless deluge that Oda floods these volumes with, things that I need to sift through to give you like the actual information. So I hope you've enjoyed it, a brief glimpse into my daily life. What makes a character great? Well, a good start is if his name is Bellamy. Easily one of the greatest characters in One Piece who takes you across the full emotional spectrum. I have pretty much felt every emotion there is to feel with Bellamy, from anger to schadenfreude, to sympathy to respect, and finally, to really wanting to cheer him on and see Bellamy succeed. Bellamy is one of those side characters that has legitimately received more development than any of the Straw Hats. And if you're not a Bellamy fan already, then you better get ready, because no matter what season it currently is, after this video, you're going to wish it was spring. Bellamy doesn't have your typical One Piece backstory. He comes from a town called Notice in North Blue, which according to the One Piece wiki looks something like this. And I always point this out, but North Blue is where all of the wealth resides. It's a very old money kind of sea. And Treble even states that Bellamy came from an incredibly rich town, indicating that Bellamy was born into a life of privilege and was pretty much set up for life as soon as he was evicted from the womb. However, Bellamy chose to throw all of that away and become a filthy pirate. And he did this because, and I quote, it was boring. So Bellamy then sought out Doflamingo, who Bellamy referred to as the pride of North Blue. So yeah, shots fired there, German, not so prideful about you. And as a side note, it's fascinating that Doflamingo's father Homing chose to live with the common people, but like not too common. He chose the richest possible place to live that wasn't Marijois. It's like a billionaire downgrading to mere upper class. But this brings up a very subtle connection. The relationship that would develop between Bellamy and Doflamingo can best be described as abusive. And that's because Doflamingo despises Bellamy for doing exactly what his father did. Bellamy actively threw away his wealth and power to live this lifestyle that Doflamingo was forced to live. So Bellamy is a constant reminder of Doflamingo's father. And I think that all of the abuse that gets hurled his way is Doflamingo's personal form of some kind of third-party revenge. Here's the thing though, from what we can tell at this stage, Bellamy wasn't a bad guy. He was just a kid trying to escape a boring life, but he also had a strong realist attitude, not believing at all in the power of dreams, and in fact his pitch to join Doflamingo was, we want to be a legit pirate crew just like you guys. We ain't like those other pirates with dreams in their heads. And so from here on out, Bellamy got caught in the cult of personality that is Doflamingo. Bellamy idolized this flamboyant flamingoman to the point of becoming something of a religious acolyte. The words of Doflamingo were the words of God, and the core tenet was that only the strong deserve to be heard, and that the weak don't get to choose how they die. The latter of which is surprisingly a belief that Trafalgar Law even adopted, despite his very strong anti-flamingo sentiments. But with this in mind, Bellamy began spreading the good word of Doflamingo, spreading it all over people's faces with his fists. Because like all cults, Doflamingo had an endgame in mind, which was the New Age, where only the strong were allowed to enter. So Bellamy's job became to recruit the strong and to purge the weak. And that's how he became the man that we first encountered in Jaya. At this point, Bellamy had been a practicing Doflamingarian for roughly a decade, and his role on Jaya is a masterclass of writing. Bellamy is like a pristine stepping stone. He's not a big character, but he is the most essential cog in the center that makes all of the bigger cogs function, because he had 4 tasks to accomplish on Jaya. 1, he needed to serve as a modern-day tie-in to the Nolan story. Bellamy is the encapsulation of disbelief. 2, Bellamy exists to show Luffy's progress, because his incident at the bar is a direct callback to Shanks and Higuma in chapter 1 of the series. Purpose number the 3rd is that Bellamy is a very loud red herring to mask the true lurking evil that is Blackbeard. And finally, Bellamy is our transition into the much grander villain that is Doflamingo. For such a minor minor character, Bellamy is such an integral element for One Piece to function. And ironically, for Bellamy to achieve his narrative purpose, it would require a catastrophic degree of in-world failure. Retrospectively, Bellamy is like a twisted antithesis of Joy Boy. He adopts the visage of Joy Boy, you know, the smile and the laughter, that's not how he laughs, but I did it. However, it's put to a very sinister purpose, designed to crush dreams rather than fulfill them. Bellamy's existence is to prevent the dawn of the world, hence why our final conflict with him occurs during the dead of night. And Oda pulls this off so well. He's really good at creating characters that are the epitome of despicable. And just to show how much of a piece of shit he is, Bellamy is introduced in chapter 222, so that's a big pile of number 2s there. And immediately he is shown to be abhorrent even by pirate standards. His first scene is losing a card game against Roshio, after which point Bellamy stabs Roshio in the hand and accuses him of cheating. Now look, Bellamy knows that Roshio didn't cheat, but the thing is, the actual rules of the card game do not matter. Because according to our Lord and Savior Flamingoman, the strong get to make all the decisions and the weak don't get to choose how they die. And that was true of Roshio, who was killed right then and there. One of the very rare characters who has actually died on screen in the present timeline of One Piece. But Bellamy had no concept of, I guess, what we would call honor among thieves. He cares about power and nothing else. And his official introduction is a panel I absolutely love, because as rarely as he utilizes it, Oda is a master of playing with light and shadow to create some really cool and ominous imagery. He's designed to look like a seriously intimidating kind of dude guy. However, Oda also undermines this by adding Bellamy's bounty of 50 million berries, which is half the amount that Luffy had at the time. And as much as I agree that bounties aren't power scaling, this is definitely designed to let us know that Bellamy isn't a real threat. He has the appearance of a threat, but underneath it all, there's nothing to back it up. Very much like how we knew that Higema was not a threat to Shanks. It was Shanks' choice to settle that dispute without fighting, just as it will become Luffy's choice to do the same with Bellamy, because Bellamy just isn't worth it. Yes, he physically assaulted Luffy and verbally insulted Luffy's ambitions of going to Skypiea, as well as finding the One Piece, thus kind of insulting the readers as well, because that's the very premise of the story. But so what? Luffy doesn't fight people just because they call him bad names. Luffy fights on behalf of others, usually after they've done something nice, like say give him a lunchbox. And that line is crossed when Bellamy beats up Mont Blanc Cricket and steals his gold, because there comes a time where even a fly is problematic enough to need swatting. And that is exactly what I would describe as what happened to Bellamy. Luffy wanders into town and one-shots Bellamy in one of the most satisfying singular punches ever displayed in any medium. And the physical defeat isn't even the worst part, because this sends Bellamy into a mental crisis. His life philosophy is all about respecting the strong and disregarding dreams. So how does he cope meeting someone an order of magnitude stronger than him who also has a dream? And it only gets worse for Bellamy from here. This is actually one of those times where the anime added a lot, because in episode 720, we see that Bellamy saw Luffy's shadow in the sky after defeating Enel. So not only was Luffy stronger, but he proved that Skypiea existed. And thus Bellamy's entire belief structure was shattered, just like his jaw. Because it's one thing to be beaten by a strong idiot, but it's another thing entirely for said strong idiot to then go and prove that a dream was real. And this is where the seed of true respect for Luffy was planted. And Bellamy, much to his credit, then decided to take in this new information and go to Skypiea to confirm it. I think a lot of people would just find a way to dissociate from the new information, double down and convince themselves that they were still somehow right. But this here shows that Bellamy is open to change. It's going to be a very long and extraordinarily painful journey for him, but there is still a tiny sliver of hope. Hope that one of the most disgusting villainous pile of number 2s can change. It's a small chance, but it shows that Bellamy is far from irredeemable. And what this does is begin an ideological conflict between flamingo philosophy and monkey philosophy. At this point, and I suppose most points, Bellamy is still dedicated to Doflamingo. He falls back on his cult leader and doubles down towards Doflamingo's ambitions. There's even some great symbolism for this post-time skip, where Bellamy's chest is literally branded with the symbol of the Don Quixote pirates. But what you can't see in this image is that within Bellamy, his heart is ever so slowly being won over by Luffy. And so we land on one of my favorite Dressrosa chapters, 706, which firstly introduces Bartolomeus, that's pretty great, but it also gives us our first Luffy-Bellamy interaction post-time skip. And it's very poetic because Luffy is disguised as Lucy, but Bellamy recognizes him instantly. Bellamy sees Luffy for exactly who he is, and he sees him so clearly. Whereas on Jaya, Bellamy was blind. He completely misjudged Luffy and couldn't see anything. So this is a huge moment of growth. And then there's the iconic Bellamy line, "I won't laugh at you anymore," which is a very big thing coming from a character known as the Hyena. It's also a great moment for Luffy because it shows his emotional maturity and judge of character. Because Luffy very quickly discovers that Bellamy has changed and now fits more into the friend basket than the enemy trash can. But what does Bellamy do here, because this is an inner crisis taking place in physical form. Luffy is here to beat Doflamingo. Both cores of Bellamy's conflicting ideologies are tearing each other apart in reality as well as within him. And this is one of those super deep character moments, as Bellamy is even ordered by Doflamingo to kill Luffy. So essentially one part of his mind trying to get rid of the other part. And it's also fascinating because this literal conflict between Luffy and Doflamingo is a direct reflection of Bellamy's mental conflict. It's almost the classic angel and devil on your shoulders giving you conflicting advice. The Doflamingo angel saying, "No matter where you go, Bellamy, you'll never be anything more than a thug," a very wide thug. How did you get so wide post time skip? My god. Meanwhile, the Luffy devil is countering with, "Mate, what are you talking about? Bellamy did change. He's done the changing already. You're a good boy, Bellamy. Don't listen to the weird pink thing," which ideologically paralyzes Bellamy. He doesn't know what to do. Under Doflamingo's ideals, the weak don't get to choose, and Bellamy is the weak. That will never change. And yet Luffy is continuously proving that dreams exist and that change is possible, which all leads to Bellamy.exe crashing and adopting the Nico Robin solution of just wanting to die. And in order to enact this, Bellamy uses a technique that he is certain will lose against Luffy. He knows it's a suicidal maneuver and gives a very touching set of what I suppose are last words. "I understand that I chose the wrong man to idolize and how pitiful that makes me, but if I'm going to be an idiot, I've got to see that choice through to the end. This is what I want, to have the end be at the hands of the only other man I've ever respected." And so Bellamy got thwacked in the face a second time in the exact same way, which is such a powerful event. The first time this punch played out was immensely satisfying. Seeing this absolute cockwaffle finally get what was coming to him was like, so good. So, the good noises. I don't know what noise you make for good things, but those are mine. And yet when we see the exact same event again, I have the completely opposite reaction. I feel really sad for Bellamy because now he's changed, and at heart, I know he's not a bad guy. And I think it's just wild that the exact same event can elicit two completely different emotional responses. It's genuinely brilliant. And it even goes a layer deeper into wankery, because remember that their symbol on Bellamy's chest? Well, that represents his body being puppeteered and owned by Doflamingo. Even when Doflamingo isn't physically controlling him, Bellamy is still moving to his will. However, his heart and mind belong to Luffy. Speaking of, Luffy, of course, does not grant Bellamy's death wish. Instead, he does a very sun god thing to do and frees Bellamy from his flamingo prison, both metaphorically and literally. In fact, double literally, freeing him from the puppet strings, but also freeing him from the birdcage. And that leaves Bellamy with something he's never really had in his adult life, a choice. And I remember back in the day, some people were confused and a bit disappointed when Bellamy didn't officially join the Grand Fleet. But that decision makes far too much sense. Bellamy spent his entire life in the service of his idol. So the one thing he isn't going to do now is instantly pledge his service to another idol. If anything, it was a very Luffy thing to do. Bellamy prioritized his own personal freedom whilst also holding great respect for someone else. And when it comes down to it, Bellamy was a victim of this world. Someone who fell prey to a world noble and was used for his entertainment and I guess as an outlet for rage against his deceased father. And just at the point of prime despair, in comes the sun god to rescue Bellamy and offer him freedom. I said this with Helmeppo as well, but Bellamy is a metaphor for what's going to happen to the entire world. Control will be stripped from the world government and Luffy will end up giving everyone freedom. Bellamy is just one of many living case studies for this, a very powerful one as well. Because if Luffy can change one of the most sickening villains in the series, then he can absolutely change the entire world. And in the meantime, Bellamy is now living his life on his own terms, retiring from piracy and pursuing a brand new career, using his newly acquired skills to show respect to his newly acquired idol. These are the top 10 most wanted women in One Piece. They are the baddest of the bad, so bad that their numbers are so high as a direct result of said badness. Starting with the 10th most wanted female criminal of all time, Nico Olvia, with a mighty 79 million berry bounty. For the longest time, I genuinely thought her name was Nico Olivia, but her name is probably a reference to the ruins of Olbia because of archaeology and such. Her name in katakana would be Oribia, after all. And Nico Olvia's bounty is the exact same as Nico Robin's initial bounty, 79 million berries apiece. They also share the exact same birthday, the same voice actor, and the same character design. Olvia is a Robin reskin, but Olvia is only one of 2 women on this list who was not a pirate. And it's actually very difficult to get a bounty if you're not a pirate. So Nico Olvia had to do something particularly naughty, which was to seek out and read the forbidden mystery cubes. But what's more impressive is that Olvia is also only one of 2 women on this list who is not a devil fruit user. She achieved 79 million berries completely fruit-free. which we cannot say for the 9th most wanted woman and or girl, Jewelry Bonnie. So we've made a pretty big leap now from 79 million to 320 million berries. And you want to know why? It's because there's really only a handful of prominent women in One Piece. And to prove this point, let me tell you the 11th highest female bounty in One Piece, which is Wenda from Where's Wally? Because during Wano, One Piece did a crossover and made an Onigashima themed Where's Wally? And as a result of this, Wally, Oddlaw, Wizard Whitebeard, Wolf, and Wenda were also given special bounties of 65 million berries. This is not a joke. If we take every canon and non-canon character in One Piece, then Wenda ends up as the 11th most wanted female pirate in the world. But even though she's a pirate, Jewelry Bonnie's bounty has very little to do with that profession. Bonnie is, of course, the beloved daughter of Bartholomew Kuma, and it's very important to keep Bonnie under control in order to keep him in line. Also, Bonnie is half-world noble, which was probably inspired by her real-life counterpart, and Bonnie, who was a noble turned pirate who, quote, was considered a good catch, but may have had a fiery temper. She supposedly stabbed a servant girl with a knife. Which is interesting because in Jewelry Bonnie's introduction, it was actually Capone Gang Beige from the next table over who stabbed someone with a fork. What would you rather be stabbed with, knife or fork? Or spoon? Spoon sounds rough. Let me know in the comments. But our fictional Bonnie is also known to have carried Sapphire Scale, an extraordinarily rare disease. And all of these factors together even scared poor Widow Sakazuki when he heard that Jewelry Bonnie had escaped. Bonnie also holds a pretty impressive record, as she is currently the youngest person to have a bounty over 100 million berries. Bonnie is actually only 12 years old, but looks a lot older due to her manipulation with her age fruit, and at the mere age of 12 commands a whopping 320 million berries. In fact, there's only one character in recorded fictional history to have had a higher bounty than Bonnie by her age, but she's also on this list, so we'll get to that in a bit. But before that bit, we have our 8th most wanted woman, Nami. Now, Nami was a bit of a slow starter in One Piece. She was introduced in Chapter 8 and performed assorted pirate activities for 10 years until the world government finally saw fit to issue her with a bounty. And what did 10 years of hard work get Nami? A bounty of 16 million berries, whilst co-worker Usopp was awarded an initial bounty of 30 million for doing arguably much less work. I guess the gender pay gap is real, or at least the gender pay out gap. Now, while I agree that Nami has more than earned her place here, the in-world reason why her number is so high isn't because of anything that Nami has specifically done. Her entire bounty net worth is purely due to her association with Luffy. Nami is an example of what I like to call lazy bounties. Lazy from both Oda and the characters in the series. For example, Nami's next bounty rise was after Dressrosa to 66 million berries. But that was because most of the Straw Hats were given a flat 50 million increase because the world government knew that Luffy's crew, they were dangerous probably, but didn't have any information about what the individual members could do, so Commodore Bran-New wanted to go home early that day and just gave them a 50 million increase across the board. And then the same thing happened again after Wano. Most of the Straw Hats were given a flat 300 million berry increase. But Nami is at a point where she does have the substance to back these numbers up. She can quite literally control the weather, and if you give her enough time to prepare, then she is capable of the most devastating attacks within the entire crew. What we can also say with certainty is that Nami is the most wanted person in this world whose name begins with Nami. The second most wanted Nami is Nami Amuro, a real-life J-pop singer who, according to episode of Sky Island, is worth 25 million berries, which is a reference to concluding her 25-year-long music career. But Nami can also tank a pretty fierce headbutt from our 7th most wanted woman in the world, Ulti, who has a very satisfying even 400 million berries, which is very impressive for a 22-year-old. In fact, Ulti is such a physical beast that she even went head-to-head with Luffy. And I mean literally head-to-head. And in the end, even an Emperor of the Sea wasn't enough to bring Ulti down, although Nami did take that opportunity to steal the win. Very bad manners of her. All up, Ulti fought Luffy, Yamato, Big Mom, and then, only then, finally fell to Nami. So Ulti was the tankiest Toby Roper member by far. That, combined with her obvious aesthetic appeal, took the fanbase a bit by storm, and in the World Top 100 character poll, she ranked in 56th place, which actually makes her the most popular member of the Beast Pirates as a whole. I'll say that again, the most popular member of the Beast Pirates, which includes Queen, King, and the King of Beasts himself, Kaido. And you know, I briefly thought about including Jack in that sentence, but then I remembered that no one would have expected him to be popular anyway. But also, controversy, because Ulti was subject to a bit of an artistic whoopsie-dick in chapter 1012, where in the magazine version, she was accidentally drawn without her mask and it revealed nothing of note, because Ulti is just a perfectly regular Pachycephalosaurus looking woman. Now, the most wanted woman on this list who is not a pirate, Belo Betty, one of the highest ranking members of the Revolutionary Army, and specifically the commander of the East Army. In addition to her bounty, Bello Betty is known for being very rude. Like, for example, that one time where she put her shoes on the meeting table at Momoiro Island. I mean, who knows where those shoes have been? Well, actually, we know. Those shoes just came from the Lucia Kingdom, which, before it never existed, was best known for agriculture, specifically the export of Moda's milk. So you just get your filthy farm shoes off my meeting table, Bello Betty. Also, Bello Betty's character design is based on a painting by Eugene Delacroix called Liberty, Leading the People. And here you can see a figure created to personify the French Revolution. They even gave her a name, Marianne. But Eiichiro Oda took the most inspiration from Marianne's exposed chest, which Bello Betty quite happily embodies. Okay, absolutely crazy connection here though. Bello Betty isn't the only character inspired by Marianne. There's actually a character straight up named Marianne in One Piece, and you probably know her better as Miss Goldenweek. And despite the fact that this doesn't suit her character or gimmicks at all, Miss Goldenweek's pirate epithet is the flag bearer of freedom. But Miss Goldenweek's bounty is only worth 29 million berries, so she missed out on being here by quite a bit. With Bello Betty, 457 million berries is quite impressive, but I'm actually surprised that it isn't even higher, because her devil fruit seems to be the linchpin of the entire Revolutionary Army. Bello Betty has the Kobu Kobu no Mi, which increases people's fighting spirit and strength at the cost of scripting and encouraging speech to say. Bello Betty can turn any group of people who can hear her into a superhuman militia purely through the power of speaking sentences. I mean, she can't mind control people, she can't make them do something that they don't want to do, but if they do want to fight, then Bello Betty can give them the power to do the thing it is that they do want to do. So if you gave this woman some sort of global communication snail, like what Uta used in Film Red, Bello Betty could have the entire planet rebelling against the world government by lunchtime, or breakfast time, or dinner time. It really does depend what time she makes the speech. Breaking into the top 5 most wanted women, we encounter Black Maria, another member of the Beast Pirates whose Viviacard databook entry states that her hobbies are, quote, romantic relationships. And given her overly amorous nature, you could say that that's written all over her face, but it's also quite literally written on her back, where we see the kanji Jonan, which means woman trouble. So as a result, Black Maria receives some, how shall we say, special treatment within the Beast Pirates. She is one of the Toby Roppo, but even then she holds a bit of an enhanced status. Because while this is only ever implied, it's likely that she and Kaido have quite the intimate relationship, and the rest of the crew are aware of this, and so from time to time tend to doubt Black Maria's actual abilities. And you know your position is in trouble when Jack is doubting you. So despite being an ancient Zoan user, and despite being colossal by default, Black Maria's true danger has nothing to do with physical abilities. Black Maria's most deadly skill is the Illusion Mist, a very vaguely defined substance which causes a target to hallucinate. In the only use case in the series, Black Maria used it to make Nico Robin see her mother, Nico Olvia, and so for a brief moment, we actually had 3 of our top 10 most wanted women in the same place, even though one of them was fake. Here's the thing though, we don't know if Black Maria's Illusion Mist is part of her Devil Fruit ability, because she's an ancient Zoan, not a mythical Zoan. That's an important distinction, because mythical Zoans are the ones that get the more magical powers, and ancient Zoans tend to stick to more scientifically accurate powers, like Triceracopters and Pteranodon face cannons. However, Black Maria is one of the only, if not the only character in the series to just defy the laws of Devil Fruits. Black Maria was able to change her hybrid Zoan form because she felt it wasn't beautiful enough. Here's what she looks like, and here's what she should look like according to Oda. And I can only imagine that Black Maria has a bit of a Nami effect happening, her bounty number being more arbitrary than anything else. I really don't see why she's more valuable than Ulti. It's more like the world government knows that she's a close associate of Kaido, but they don't really know much beyond that. So a bunch of generic numbers later, we've landed at 480 million and the 5th most wanted woman in the world. But the chasm between the 5th and the 4th can only be described as gaping, because next up we have Nico Robin, taking us dangerously close to the billion-berry threshold with a bounty of 930 million, which is a massive jump from her previous bounty of 130 million. The world government saw fit to give her an 800 million berry increase all in one go. Who would have thought that this mere child being hit by a tomato would one day pose such a threat to global stability? So as seems to be a bit of a theme with the most wanted women, Robin's primary danger isn't strength, although she does have an unreasonable quantity of that as well. In fact, she can even use Fishman Karate, despite being neither fish nor man. But Robin's threat is far more profound than any punch fighting ability. Nico Robin is the only person in this world who can read the ancient language inscribed on the poneglyphs, at least naturally. There are other fabled methods of reading this information, like awakening the third eye of the three-eyed tribe, but Robin only needs 2 eyes, and honestly, I reckon she'd be able to do just fine with even 1, and she'd look much more like a pirate as well. Yar me poneglyphs is probably what she would say. What this means though is that she and she alone can learn and distribute the true history of the world, which is, well, not a good look for the world government, not a good look at all. Robin is also 30 years old, which is almost exactly the median age of the top 10 most wanted women. But the chasm between number 4 and number 3 can only be described as not gaping. Charlotte Smoothie clocks in at 932 million berries, a mere 2 million ahead of Nico Robin. And to illustrate, that works out to just over half a Sham or half a Butchie, who are collectively worth 7 million berries. And speaking of Sham, if we were doing the live action version of this list, then she would definitely qualify, and has certainly had quite the impact on this fan base, as you can see demonstrated on this graph, which chronicles Sham thirst over time. As you can see, we experience a rather sharp increase in 2023, with a record high number of real people now wanting Sham of the Black Cat Pirates to be the mother of their children. In regards to mothers and children, Smoothie is the 14th daughter and 35th child overall of Charlotte Lin Lin, and has worked her way up the family hierarchy to be considered the 3rd most powerful individual within the Big Mom Pirates, and our main characters have been absurdly lucky to have never needed to face off against her directly. Smoothie's devil fruit abilities are quite frankly disturbing. The Shiba Shiba no Mi allows her to extract liquid from anything by wringing them like a wet towel, which was notably used to produce some sweet giraffe juice. But there's more to Smoothie than that though. She's also a master of Haki, sword combat, and even has a master's degree in general sadism. But thanks to a lot of fatesome twists, Smoothie has never had the opportunity to unleash her full strength on our crew. Whole Cake Island itself was too chaotic, and while Smoothie was present on Wano for the entirety of the Wano arc, she kept falling down the waterfall with the rest of the Big Mom Pirates. Alright, let's get serious now, because the 2nd most wanted woman in the world is Boa Hancock, who has one of the single biggest bounty leaps in recorded fictional history. Her bounty prior to becoming a warlord was 80 million berries, and after being unceremoniously dumped from that position, the world government saw fit to increase that by almost 1.6 billion berries. But what makes Boa Hancock worth that much? Well, it's because she is nigh on undefeatable, and if you engage her, you're much more likely to end up on the floor under her featables, because with the combination of the Merimeri no Mi and Boa Hancock being regarded as the most beautiful woman in the world means that if someone feels even slightly a certain way about Hancock, then you are already out of the fight. We've even seen a vice admiral brought to his knees. Momonga had to stab his own hand to focus his mind on pain just to avoid being turned into stone. Which is great and all, he's not stone, but he's equally as ineffective in this state as well. So whether you're affected by Hancock's powers or not, you still end up practically useless. Even Emperor of the Sea and Cherry Pie Appreciator Blackbeard was terrified to let Boa Hancock go, because he knew that all she needed was a second, and he would have been turned to stone just like that. Even then, there's a woman out there who surpasses this power. Before we get to her though, here's a section I like to call unknown but probably, because there's a lot of notorious women in this world with bounties that have yet to be revealed. Such as Blackbeard's very own Katarina Devon. She is known as the most dangerous female pirate to have ever been imprisoned in Impel Down, so she's a pretty big deal, and I imagine that her berry value reflects that. It's also worth bringing up Shaki. She's a retired pirate now, but almost certainly still has a rather large active bounty, because you don't get to retire from all of the crimes you've already committed. Elder Neon or Gloriosa, as a former Rocks Pirate member, is also going to have a pretty high number on her head as well, and we also have Whitey Bay, the only known female pirate to serve directly under Whitebeard. And also, we shouldn't forget Emporio Ivankov, who is certainly one of the most wanted women in the world, but only sometimes. But our number one 100% most wanted woman in the world, with a 4,388,000,000 berry bounty, is Charlotte Lin Lin. Not just the most wanted woman, but one of the single most powerful and terrifying people to have ever lived. She is physically insurmountable. If Lin Lin encounters you in battle, there is no option. You cannot fight, there is only run. But it doesn't stop at breaking your body, because Lin Lin can also manipulate your soul. And Charlotte Lin Lin has a bounty so high that the people who assigned the numbers got to be a bit creative, as the 88 in her bounty can be read as haha, meaning mother. Charlotte Lin Lin also established half of the 2 great matriarchies of the One Piece world, which are are apparently the Charlottes and the Nikos, as they dominate 40% of this list. And in addition to the world government wanting her ever so badly, Charlotte Linlin has also been more generally wanted by at least 43 men who all at one stage became her husband. And so former Emperor of the Sea Charlotte Linlin will almost certainly remain as the most wanted woman to have ever lived in One Piece. And if you need more One Piece content, which we all know you do, then I would highly suggest this video next. The most powerful character in One Piece is Bird. He may not have the physical strength of an emperor, the military might of a world government, or some sort of super ancient weapon, but Big News Morgans has something even more powerful at his disposal. He is more influential than any single entity on this planet, and if he deemed fit, he could topple the world government with a single article. But I'm not here to talk about what Morgans could do, I'm here to talk about what he's already done. Big News Morgans has created kingdoms, emperors, heroes, villains, and potentially the greatest accomplishment of all, he created the Pirate King. I'm not exaggerating, unlike Morgans. He has influenced this world on a scale that no other character could even dream of. And for what reason? I may be a miser, but I am first and foremost a journalist. I am a DJ of words, one who occasionally spins lies to move the hearts of the people. I decide what gets published. So the goal of Big News Bird is to essentially tell the best story possible. The most exciting, the most heartbreaking, the most fearsome, the most euphoric, the most whatever it is. Doesn't really matter what the emotion is, what Morgans wants is for his readers to feel. And that is exactly what makes him so dangerous. Because Morgans isn't telling a fictional story. He's manipulating reality, casting living people in the roles that he selects for them, and then creating characters for the world to both love and hate. And in fact, I don't think it would be an exaggeration to state that the very fate of the world depends entirely on which outcome Morgans believes would be the most exciting. Don't believe me? Well, here's a small example. Sora, Warrior of the Sea. This is a comic strip that has been published in Morgan's newspaper, the World Economic Journal, for literally decades now. And as a result, absolutely everyone in the North Blue knows and fears the Germa Kingdom. The comic is about a marine hero named Sora, who regularly faces off against the supervillains that are the Germa 66. And the comic serves two purposes, as explained by Vito of the Fire Tank Pirates. From what I hear, the story is based on the true exploits of the heroes within the Navy. In other words, it was propaganda for the kids. So purpose number one, it glorifies the Marines. Sora is the hero and it makes them look like the good guys. But the thing you'll start to notice about Morgans is that he very rarely takes just one side. Because remember, his goal is to stir the hearts of everyone, and everyone is everyone. And I think that Vito again puts it best. But that wasn't what got me fascinated with it. It was the Germa, the army of evil that used a variety of forces and weapons to put the screws on Sora each time. Sure, they always lost in the end, but I cheered like hell for him, and that's not an uncommon opinion amongst Sora readers. In fact, in a very Batman-style effect, the villains tend to be more popular than the hero. And so Morgans continues to publish Sora because it inspires children to become both heroes and villains of the world, depending on which faction they most identify with. And characters like Vito became what they did due to that inspiration. Think of Sora as Big News Morgans planting seeds, influencing people from a young age so that Morgans can go on to use them as both heroes and villains in the future. But you know what? Let's have a more tangible example. Arguably, Morgan's biggest slow burn project to date has been the Worst Generation, a very unique opportunity in time presented on Sabaody Archipelago, with an incident involving a world noble, a marine admiral, and 11 rookie pirates with bounties over 100 million berries. This was a big news gift. You have two of the highest authorities in the world, a world noble and a marine admiral, going up against this ragtag group of rookies. And of course, the most exciting way to portray that is by emphasizing the underdogs. I don't know why that's emphasis. We shouldn't do that. And so he created the Worst Generation. Because here's a fun fact, I can't speak for the anime because the anime does weird things, but in the manga, the term supernova or super rookie isn't used until well after the actual events of Sabaody. It's in the title of chapter 498, the 11 supernovas, but that's it. No character on Sabaody coined that term. It was selected after the event by, say, a certain someone who wanted to create some sort of new and exciting group of villains to follow. Or are they heroes? I don't know. I also don't care. It doesn't matter so long as it's exciting. And this newfound notoriety was a big boost to these pirate crews. For example, take Cavendish, someone who was every bit as dangerous, if not more at the time than the supernovas. However, when Morgans dropped Cavendish as a main character from the World Economic Journal, he lost almost all name recognition and faded into obscurity. Meanwhile, Morgan's chosen ones were allowed to trade off their new global recognition, forming alliances with emperors, forming alliances with each other, and one even became a warlord of the sea. And ultimately, with the addition of Blackbeard, the group evolved into the Worst Generation, a name almost certainly given by Morgans as well, because he gives all names, all of them. But the plan goes as follows. Morgan seeds these figures as supernovas, then he cultivates them as Worst Generation members, and finally, one of them is intended to be harvested as the next Pirate King. The way I see it, Stussy, in the near future, one of the Worst Generation is going to rise to claim the mantle of the Pirate King. This isn't just an insightful bird-based prediction. This is Morgan's giving away the game plan of his narrative. The way he sees it, the most exciting story to be told is one where one of these individuals claims the title. And to be fair, why wouldn't it be? Morgans has been deliberately developing these characters over the course of years now. And yes, I say characters because the way people like Luffy are portrayed in the World Economic Journal is nothing like how they are in reality. The world sees Luffy purely through bird vision as this sort of distorted, evil, chaotic mastermind. But we'll get more into that in a bit, because before that, Morgans had another saga-long story to pay off first. This albatross was instrumental in constructing the Paramount War, because the World Economic Journal was the outlet that published Ace's public execution information, which was used to lure Whitebeard into Marineford at a specific time on a specific day. Very helpful for the world government, but what was less than helpful is what Morgans did immediately following the war. When Luffy, Jinbei, and Rayleigh re-invaded the island to ring the Oxbell, it was Morgans who made the decision to publish that event, which we know because we have a Marine complaining at great length about this decision. It was described as brand new as, "It highlights our failure to capture him. There is no greater humiliation than this." If it were up to the world government, this incident would have been kept quiet. But it wasn't up to the world government. It was up to Bird. And Bird saw an opportunity to stir some more hearts. I mean, a pirate mourning for his fellow brother pirate. It's, the emotion. It's too good to resist. And so his decision led to all of the Straw Hats receiving the 3D2Y message. So without Morgans, they all would have returned to Sabadi and not received the training gifted to them by Bartholomew Kuma. Alright, let's step back a bit though. Or forward a bit. Arc-wise forward, time-wise backwards. To Fishman Island, and let's have a bit of a quick quiz. Before the rise of Monkey D. Dragon, who held his title of the greatest criminal in the world? Was it A, Fisher Tiger? Yes, it was. I can't be bothered to continue with the others. But it was legit Fisher Tiger, who was considered to be the world's greatest criminal at the time. A legacy crafted by his one-man invasion of Marijois, but a legacy capitalized on and spread at great length by Big News Morgans, which we know because in Fisher Tiger's flashback, you can see a young Hody Jones and the future New Fishman pirates reading the World Economic Journal. Morgans, by the way, is 53 in the current timeline, so back here he would have been about 37. Still well and truly in charge of Big Bird News. But this was a pivotal moment in history. Not because anything big actually happened, but more so due to a relative lack of big things happening. The one and only Pirate King, Goldie Roger, had been executed 8 years prior, and since then the world had been lacking an interesting villain to follow. But Fisher Tiger was the new main antagonist that Morgans had been waiting for. That's why the actual message of the Sun Pirates was never spread, which, as a refresher, was, in Fisher Tiger's own words, "I break the unjust laws of this world, but only to free the oppressed. The Sun Pirates fight for freedom and liberty." It almost sounds like a bit of a preliminary revolutionary army, and of course the Sun Pirates had a very strict no-killing policy. However, in all of the newspapers, Fisher Tiger was portrayed as an overly brutal embodiment of vengeance on humanity, a monster who would not be stopped until each and every human had been wiped off the planet. Again, Morgans was able to do the Morgans thing where he stirred hearts. He stirred a lot of fear into that particular heart dish. Fear in humans, that is, but he stirred hope into certain fishmen. People often wonder how Hody Jones and his crew morphed into the terrifying zealots they became, but it was because of Morgans. All he ever published about Fisher Tiger was designed to induce a sense of cruelty and bloodthirsty terror towards humans. And so, naturally, that became the role model that the young fishmen were looking up to. In reality, Fisher Tiger was a very compassionate man who absolutely detested senseless violence. And if Morgans had portrayed Tiger differently, then Hody Jones may have turned out differently. But Morgans needed that new main antagonist, and Fisher Tiger was cast for the role, which is a great example of the very real dangers of treating reality as a story. For one of his less subtle maneuvers, Morgans is obviously responsible for Luffy becoming an Emperor of the Sea, given that Morgans was the one who crowned him twice actually. But the first time is one of the rare examples where we actually get insight into what was actually written written in the article. The newspaper stated that according to reliable sources, Straw Hat Luffy already had 7 powerful pirate crews under his sway, combining the authority of a captain with over 5,000 followers, the notoriety of brotherhood with both Ace and the number 2 of the revolutionary Sabo, the extreme charisma and leadership to assume impromptu command over the formidable trio of the army of evil Germa 66, the Sun Pirates, and the Fire Tank Pirates, the calculated strategic brilliance to execute the destruction of the Queen's castle, and the strength to defeat her officers worth 800 million and 1 billion berries. The result of this incident was clear to all. Straw Hat Luffy was victorious. It was the arrival of the 5th Emperor of the Sea. Now, we know that almost everything stated here is either an extremely biased reading of the situation or an outright lie. But that doesn't matter, because to Morgans, this was his big Infinity War MCU moment. This article only works because Morgans himself had cultivated every faction that was involved. His Sora comic had been instilling fear in the very real Germa Kingdom for decades. He invoked the name of the Sun Pirates, led by former World Economic Journal main antagonist Fisher Tiger. The Fire Tank Pirates are of course part of Morgan's Worst Generation project, and then at the helm of all of those threads, Morgans plonked Luffy, because that was the most interesting way to tell the story. He could have said it was a plot masterminded by Capone Gang Beige, which is actually much closer to the truth. He could have even gone so far as to claim that Capone was now the 5th Emperor, but that just wouldn't have been quite as exciting though. And the same goes for the post-Wano Emperor shift as well. Luffy, Law, and Kid were given equal bounties by the world government, and so officially they were equal threats. But remembering that the world government does not choose who becomes an emperor, it was Morgans who took that one step further by electing to fill that power vacuum with Luffy, which makes sense because after Whole Cake Island, Morgans very much had Luffy set up as an emperor in waiting. So it was a very natural choice for his story. And just to emphasize how malleable and frankly irrelevant truth actually is, we have the current Egghead Island arc, where Morgans has already written the conclusion to an event that has yet to happen. Morgans has decided that he's going to stir hearts by claiming that Luffy has kidnapped Dr. Vegapunk. That's just how insanely powerful he is. Morgans essentially has the ability to write reality. Not literally, of course, but consensus becomes truth, and Morgans has the power to manufacture consensus. Interestingly enough, Morgans has also crowned a 2nd emperor recently, being Flame Emperor Sabo. In chapter 956, Morgans was offered a bribe by the world government not to publish the Cobra murder story, to which Morgans said, yeah, nah, and published it anyway, along with a photo of Sabo standing over Cobra's corpse. And as always, this served a dual purpose. To those who sympathize with the world government, this was terror, absolutely terror-inducing, leading us to consume more and more news over concern for our safety. And for those against the world government, this was a complete triumph, leading us to consume more and more news to bask in the glory that was this brutal murder. And Sabo has now become a character with influence potentially greater than Dragon himself, with the Flame Emperor title being chosen specifically to draw a connection between Sabo and his brother Luffy. A parallel narrative, if you will, with both brothers upending the old systems in their respective fields, which is quite literally stated by one of the new Sabo worshippers, a designation that I use again with no exaggeration, because people are quite literally starting to view Sabo as some sort of deity. And it's all because a big bird man decided to publish the story. Because a global revolution seems like a pretty funky story arc for the World Economic Journal, and I mean, no matter who wins, both sides are still buying those newspapers. But inevitably, it will almost certainly fall to Morgans to officially crown the next Pirate King, just as he's been planning. The real shock here is that he also crowned the first Pirate King. Roger himself only found out that he was the Pirate King after reading the World Economic Journal. In fact, he may have literally been one of the last people to find out that he was now a monarch, an event which happened 25 years ago, so Morgans would have been about 28 years old at the time. So to be fair here, it could have been his predecessor, but the time range is still well within Morgans' active career. And you know what? It doesn't matter which bird it was specifically. What matters is that Morgans has that power right now. And that title from that bird who wrote that newspaper gave Roger the notoriety to use this title to start the golden age of piracy, giving birth to decades of storyline for the World Economic Journal to create. Big News Morgans is a man of unparalleled power. He controls emotions, he controls consensus, he controls truth, he controls history, and to some degree, he even controls the future. Luffy has no greater ally in this world and no greater enemy. So all we can hope is that Luffy's story will be deemed the most exciting to tell. One Piece is a goofy pirate comic, except for the parts where it isn't. These ones, look at them, these are the parts. Some of the most messed up things that I think I've seen in manga in general come directly from One Piece. And there's a number of characters that, when you truly dive into them, have extremely disturbing backstories. To be clear, every character in One Piece with a backstory worth telling does have a sad past. Lots of death and feelings and crying so hard that your nose is leaking, that sort of stuff. But some characters go a step further. They go beyond sad and well into the realm of disturbing. The way I find disturbing in this context is tragedy, but with a twist. A twist often inflicted by unusual cruelty, whether it be inflicted by a person or just by a situation. And we're not going to go with the easy options either, e.g. your Namis, your Sanjis, and your Lawses. We know those stories very well. Mother death, mother murder, and well, mother murder again, except this one comes with a bonus of hiding in a pile of corpses to escape a genocide, which is, admittedly, it's pretty messed up. But these stories aren't even close to the depths of disturbing that we will be exploring here today, because the darkest stories simply cannot exist in the spotlight that a main character inhabits. So we're going to go backstage, where we immediately encounter one Boa Hancock and her two sisters, who were former world noble slaves with one shocking detail in their past that most people overlook. To be fair to everyone else, all former slaves have a pretty messed up past, but even amongst that group, the Boa sisters are unique. The earliest visual we have of Boa Hancock is in Chapter 0, and she's somewhere between 7 to 8 age units in total, telling her sisters that you need to be really strong to be a pirate, very much mimicking Luffy's attitude towards piracy at age 7. And so the Boa sisters go on to become pirates at a very young age. However, when Hancock was 12, the three of them were abducted at sea and sold into slavery. And not just under any old slavery, but slavery specific to the world nobles. Again, all slavery is abhorrent, but there is one particular type that you absolutely do not want, and it's this one. The three sisters were stripped, chained, and violently branded with the hoof mark of the world nobles, and Boa Hancock describes her experience as follows. The first man I ever saw instilled an undying fear in me. It was all so terrible. I knew nothing but despair. I used to pray for death. Hence the hatred of men, because you'd probably hate men as well if the first one you saw was a world noble. At some stage, Hancock and her sisters were force-fed devil fruits purely for the entertainment of said world nobles, and most people know from here that Fisher Tiger did eventually save the sisters, but what most people neglect and or outright forget is that this event occurred 4 years later. 4 whole years. And you know what? The fact that they were even alive after 4 years is astonishing. Although I don't know whether to call it fortunate or unfortunate, because some interpretations argue that there is implied sexual assault in Hancock's story. It's nothing that's ever been confirmed by Oda, but it's also not in any way out of the question. The world nobles represent the very worst that humanity has to offer. And looking at this fictional pirate comic realistically, there may be a reason why 3 beautiful women survived for 4 years, where many slaves don't even survive a week. It's also one of the rare cases of active PTSD in One Piece, because just thinking about the past mentally broke Sandersonia. It was not a pleasant time, to say the least. And also, this story doesn't yet have a good ending. In a weird way, the Boa sisters never escaped. They still live in the world controlled by their tormentors, and up until recently, they were a key part of upholding that power system. So they were freed simply to serve again. For a change of pace, let's step back in time now. Let's say about 63 years, and let's pick an island at random, and Elbaf. Elbaf it is. Well, on this island is the story of a cursed child. A non-Harry Potter cursed child, with a lot less time travel, but a lot more cannibalism. And said cursed child is Charlotte Lin Lin, who at heart was just a kid who wanted a family. However, time after time, she was either abandoned by those who couldn't handle her, or used by those who thought they could. The best case scenario for the life of Charlotte Lin Lin was being sold into slavery to the world government by Mother Carmel, a thoroughly disturbing character in and of herself, pretending to be a kind parental figure, earning the trust of children just to sell them off as produce. And it was also oddly appropriate that this institution was called the Sheep's House, because Lin Lin was about to turn this into Silence of the Lambs. On her 6th birthday, Lin Lin experienced the happiest moment of her life, followed immediately by the most heartbreaking, as all of her friends had gathered to celebrate Lin Lin's birthday, and then in the blink of an eye, they all vanished. And some people to this day do not understand what happened in this moment. And I think that's fair enough, because the truth is so dark that you could never put it perfect page in a shonen manga. Lin Lin lost herself in pure gluttony, devouring the food so voraciously that she didn't stop after it was done and consumed all of her friends as well as Mother Carmel, and also assorted parts of tables and chairs, which I guess is a nice textural complement to the human flesh. And complementary contrast is an essential part of any fine cuisine. This is also how we know that if you literally eat a devil fruit user, you inherit their ability, because all of a sudden, Lin Lin ended up with the Sorosoro no Mi powers previously held by Mother Carmel. And to this day, Lin Lin doesn't know what happened to them. It's quite tragic, really. She thinks that everyone just abandoned her like everyone else, which is what led Charlotte Lin Lin to become Big Mom. That and Streisand, who eats meat logs, and surprisingly, that is not a euphemism. He literally did the thing it is that I said. But Big Mom would dedicate her life to fulfilling her dream of having a family that could not abandon her, which was enforced primarily by fear. Why fear? Because fear is the only emotion she seems to be capable of eliciting from people. And no matter what evil she commits, I will always view her as a very tragic character. For a much less sympathetic and much more intentionally twisted character, here is Dr. Hogback, a character that the fanbase has a tendency to forget about, and I don't blame them because his story is downright sickening. And you know what? In retrospect, the warning signs were certainly there because we do have a picture of Hogback as a child, and he looks like a stock standard sociopathic Romulan. You know how in all of the serial killer documentaries, people are always like, what? Him? He seems so normal, so average. Why would I, an also average person, suspect him? Well, Hogback is the opposite. He seemed so suspicious that apparently he was too suspicious to suspect. To add to that, Hogback was a legitimately good, nay, a great doctor, hailed as a miracle surgeon, and even admired by cotton candy lover Chopper. But one day, Hogback fell in love with a theater actress named Victoria Sindri, who promptly turned down his marriage proposal. And unfortunately, soon after this, Sindri would suffer a fatal accident and passed away. Wait, did I say unfortunately? Because that's wrong. This is Hogback we're talking about. So this was most fortunate indeed. Dr. Hogback saw this as a valuable second chance. His obsession with Sindri was so profound that he stole her corpse and reanimated it using the shadow of another woman named Margarita, all thanks to the shadow shenaniganry of one Gecko Moria. But the thing is, he didn't just want to bring Sindri back to life. No, that would be too simple. He wanted to, in his hog mind, improve Sindri by making her into a woman who could not reject him, which worked. And Hogback would consistently exercise this power by physically beating zombie Sindri, and she had to obey each and every order. There is a slight positive ending for someone in this story though, because after Thriller Bark, Margarita did get her shadow back, and Sindri's corpse was assumedly finally allowed to rest. Although actually, who knows? Hogback may still have Sindri's corpse in his possession because he is still alive, even though we have yet to see him post-timeskip. Now next up are some characters that we've seen exclusively post-timeskip, and this is such an underrated moment when it comes to twisted and disturbing. Fukaboshi, Manboshi, and Ryuboshi, a trio of merman siblings that never get talked about in any context really, but they have one of the toughest moments in the series. When their mother Otohime was murdered by racist scallywag Hody Jones, they did not have the luxury of mourning. The brothers had to immediately act to prevent Shirahoshi from using the power of Poseidon, which would have potentially destroyed Fishman Island. So as their mother slowly died in front of them, Manboshi and Ryuboshi started singing and dancing to distract Shirahoshi, whilst tears endlessly flooded down their eyes. Even Fukaboshi had to put on a smile, even though he didn't dance. And it's one of those gut punches that Eiichiro Oda is so annoyingly good at. It's very similar to Toko watching Yasu die, but not being able to do anything except laugh due to the smile fruit. But I just wanted to throw that in because it's a moment that I never see talked about. But let's get back to the truly twisted. Kurozumi Kanjuro might be one of the most bleak and twisted characters to have ever existed in One Piece. I should say that the story of the Kurozumi clan in general is one of the more weirdly dark aspects of One Piece, because the entire clan were hunted by the people of Wano under the rule of the Kozuki clan, aka our heroes, who did absolutely nothing to stop it and may very well have endorsed it. Wano has a very questionable history. But Kanjuro was born into a theater troupe, and he had the experience of watching his parents get murdered on stage simply because they were Kurozumi, which seeded Kanjuro's lifelong convolution of fiction and reality. Because if his parents can be killed for real in a fictional story, then surely he can play fiction in reality. And I want to pay special attention to the way Oda draws Kanjuro in these flashbacks. Because unlike, I think, literally every other character in the series, Oda purposely draws Kanjuro without form, visually depicting that Kanjuro has no sense of self. He is malleable and versatile, like a really moldy old ditto. And the way Kanjuro dealt with his trauma was via escapism. He decided to play a character, and as it so happens, up-and-coming director Kurozumi Orochi was developing developing a play with the perfect role for Kanjuro. It was a bit deeper than that though, because this escapism was meant to be more permanent in nature. In Orochi's words, you will live your life as a Kozuki, and ultimately, without a single soul noticing, you will die as a Kozuki. Words which made Kanjuro happy, genuinely happy for the first time since his parents died. He then acted using the only thing that he knew as inspiration, which is death, lots and lots of death, taking on the role of a grave robber, stealing hair from corpses to make brushes, and acting so loyal with the aim of one day being killed alongside Oden and the rest of the Kozuki clan. However, on the night of the show, Kozuki Oden decided to do a bit of improvising, which really messed up the scripted ending of this play. Although in the end, even with all of the time travel stuff, Kanjuro died quite satisfied. He performed his role to perfection, and when he dropped the Kozuki character, he did eventually turn back into the blob that Oda originally depicted him as, with his final legacy being the cousin bull, declaring that his final performance would be the glorious death of the Kurozumi clan, which came to fruition, as not only Kanjuro but also Orochi died, and the final remaining Kurozumi, Tama, doesn't even know she is one, so the clan is effectively dead. But elsewhere in the world, a child was being born who was never considered alive to begin with. Her name is Baby 5, a comic relief character with a seriously gut-wrenching past. The gag is that she'll do anything as long as you say that you need her to do it, because she has this crippling desire to be needed, which garners pretty, admittedly, funny results, but the history behind these quirks makes me feel bad for each and every time I've laughed. As a child, she wasn't even raised as a human. She was born in a very poor village to very poor reception. One other villager rebuking Baby 5's mother by saying, "Why did you have the child? It won't be of help for years and it eats plenty." And so her mother abandoned her in the forest with the parting words, "You're no use around here. You're unwanted and unneeded." So as a child, the only value in her life was usefulness. And so that's why in the present day, Baby 5 would happily take her own life if it was of any usefulness to someone else. And in case you haven't realized it by now, the reason why she's called Baby 5 is because her mother didn't even bother to give her a name. To her and the rest of the village, this was just child number 5, hence Baby 5. But even her disturbing backstory pales in comparison to fellow Dressrosa alumni Admiral Fujitora. And this is a unique one because we still don't know the full extent of his mysterious backstory. However, what we do know for a fact is that it definitely belongs in this video. During his life, the evils Fujitora has borne witness to were so severe that his solution to the problem was to blind himself so that he would never have to see them again. And to be clear, we're not just talking one evil singular. We're talking a series of horrifying evils plural throughout his life that led him to this drastic decision. Imagine being in a position where you're seeing so many endless atrocities committed in front of you that your only solution to keep on living in this world is to literally blind yourself. And this also has a twist of modern day tragedy because the only time that Fujitora has ever questioned this decision was the end of Dressrosa, where he actively wanted to see Luffy, with this moment being the only thread of hope that Fujitora has ever experienced. So let me know in the comments, what do you think Fujitora saw that drove him to blind himself? There are 10 things about Wano that hold this arc back from being the perfect prized epitome of a One Piece experience. These were either integral missing aspects, a lackluster continuation of Oda tropes, or some things that just got plain old fumbled. I should also point out that I actually loved Wano, and it's definitely one of my top 5 favorite arcs in the series. However, because, and this is the internet, there is no such thing as nuance, and if I publicly state even one thing about the arc that I don't like, then it automatically makes me a One Piece hater. These are 10 gripes compared to literally hundreds of aspects I loved about Wano. But when everything is said and done, these 10 things stand out to me as uniquely unfortunate. An assortment of bad apples and another way superbly juicy fruit market. And on that delicious note, I'm hungry, so let's begin. Problem number the first one is Zoro, the tease. Because throughout the vast majority of this arc, it seemed like Zoro was being built up to have an unusual character arc. Something similar to what Sanji embarked on during Whole Cake Island. There are parts of Wano that seem to weigh Zoro with equal protagonistic importance as it does with Luffy. Setting up a whole grudge against Orochi for what he did to Yasu, flooding him with the drive to beat Kaido himself, and some ridiculously tantalizing hints about his origins, including the past presence of a samurai who looks exactly like him. But we never quite got there. If Zoro's story was a pool, then what we did was stay in the shallow part near the stairs, you know, the part where all of the toddlers urinate. But we could see the the expanse of the pool and the potential of its depth. Wano was a real tease for Zoro fans, and it's not like we got nothing at all. There was plenty to be satisfied with, especially knowing how Shimotsuki Village came about. But I guess to me it was a now or never situation. Zoro will never have a better opportunity for exploration than on a sword-obsessed island where his family almost certainly came from. I don't even particularly care about the Grim Reaper thing. That's a classic piece of Oda intrigue that can be answered at a later date, as can a lot of Wano mysteries, like say Onegashima's original name or why Wano has all sorts of different climates. All of that stuff is just background flavor that I'm happy to keep shrouded for now, maybe even forever. Something I'm less than thrilled with is Wano issue the second being fake out deaths. Now, to be completely fair, this is not a Wano exclusive problem. Death has always been Oda's kryptonite as a writer, because he is a greedy story man. Oda wants to hit you right in the dramatic nutsack with a death scene, but then also keep his wacky characters alive for feel-good reasons. Oda is the type of person who wants to have his funeral as well as be there to watch it. Just reminds me of a certain story about a boy who cried wolf. That is Oda. Oda has cried death so many times in One Piece that I don't believe any death scene I see, which in Wano is a pretty big detriment because actually, to his credit, Oda followed through on some deaths. Just not for the characters who were actually given death scenes. Oda wrote fantastic death scenes for Kinemon and Kiku, and when I read them, I quite rightfully didn't buy a single piece of merchandise from this charlatan death salesman, and then it turned out that Izo and Ashura Doji actually did die, and I had the same reaction. I didn't buy it. Because this story has trained me not to believe the author who cries death. And that's really sad because they were great characters and it would have been nice to feel the emotional impact of their loss. As it stands, it serves as more of an academic curiosity. The fact that Oda killed these characters fascinates me from a meta perspective, rather than makes me feel anything for the characters in question and the impact on the story. Now, speaking of impact on the story, disappointment number 3 is that Hiyori was yet another princess prop, which is a term I coined a couple of years ago to describe One Piece women whose entire purposes are to serve as motivation for another character rather than actually do anything themselves. Think Rebecca, for example. She was a prop to tell the story of Kyros and not really Rebecca. And Hiyori, in my opinion, turned out to be smack bang on brand. As far as I see it, her primary purpose was a prop to be used to further Denjiro and Kawamatsu's characters, as well as a pathway for Zoro to attain Enma. Although admittedly Hiyori was on the verge of becoming a fully fledged character when she was about to kill Orochi, but she was more so keeping the hilt of that murder blade warm for Denjiro. I think you could take Hiyori out of Wano entirely, and with a couple of minor tweaks, everything plays out pretty much exactly the same. I'm legitimately struggling to remember one significantly impactful thing she did that wasn't in service of a character that Oda actually wanted to explore. What she did do, I suppose, was play in and out all of the acts, which is actually my 4th thing. The act structure lost its way. The idea of dividing Wano into acts was nothing short of brilliant, both thematically appropriate and a way for Oda to treat the arc fatigue that was present during Whole Cake Island and Dressrosa. Completing acts felt like making significant progress, and the intervals between those acts was the reward for doing so. However, I think the system falls apart with Act 3, which for some context, Act 3 alone is longer than the entirety of Whole Cake Island, and came shockingly close to being even longer than Dressrosa. And look, granted, this is definitely the perspective of an ignorant Westerner, but I'm not sure why Oda didn't divide the acts further. Like say Act 3 is just the Oden flashback, Act 4 is the raid on Onigashima, and Act 5 is the epilogue. Instead, what we have is a very bloated Act 3 that took so long that I forgot the act system was even a thing to begin with. This is an incredibly minor complaint, by the way. Wano has been so good that pretty much everything I'm saying here is a minor issue, except for 2 big ones, which we are going to save for the end because, whoa, holy crap. Continuing though, my 5th gripe of the Wano arc is Jinbei's reintroduction. There aren't that many moments in One Piece that make me go, hey, that's a bit unbelievable, which is a big credit to a series where its characters can slather themselves in ramen noodles and call it martial art. But what happened with Jinbei here was just so unbelievable that I found it immersion breaking. The fact that he shows up at just the right port on just the right day at just the right moment to start the raid when he didn't even know about the raid is just absurd. No engineering in the world is capable of suspending my disbelief here. In fact, I'll add to that. The person who planned the raid didn't even know which port was the correct one. I love Jinbei. He's fantastic, but this is just a little bit too convenient. And what's worse is that we didn't get any answers regarding the dramatic finale of Whole Cake Island and how everyone managed to escape. Right now, the only explanation I can come up with is that this shockingly convenient scenario ties into a future plot point. Like, say Jinbei ran into a Grand Fleet member and they gave him a piece of Luffy's Vivia card. And I love Jinbei, so I am in this weird spot where his reintroduction was both a high point and a low point of Wano for me. Number 6 is more of a personal preference gripe, as are all of these, but it's not enough Toki. Toki is probably one of the most exciting characters in ever. This being that has come hot out of the Void Century oven. She knows so much, not only about the history of this world, but also about the future of this world. And we get absolutely nothing from her, at least not in that regard. As the story of Odin is told, you could forget that Toki is a Void Century time traveler because it's almost never addressed. And I suppose that actually may be for the best because her story almost certainly ties into the giant mysteries of the series. And in the future, we'll definitely see how the Toki cog fits into the history machine inevitably. But could we not have had just one little like itty bitty tiny nugget of intrigue? From starving to overstuffed now, man complaining about comics on the internet point number 7 is that the chain of power-ups got a little bit ridiculous. By which I specifically mean Luffy. In such quick succession, he mastered Advanced Armament Haki, Advanced Conqueror's Haki, and awakened his Devil Fruit, all over the course of essentially one arc climax. And the wildest part is that even after all of those power-ups, I still never quite felt that Luffy was at the point of actually overwhelming Kaido. Luffy versus Kaido to me feels like it was missing one penultimate phase before the finishing blow. Because in the end, it was less that Luffy beat Kaido, and more that Kaido decided to be beaten by arrogantly tanking the punch. That punch, by the way, does bring up a rather infamous Eiichiro Oda statement where he said, "Probably my audience will not be satisfied if the reason for defeating Kaido is just because Luffy's punch is so strong. Luffy and I have to find a solution somehow." Now, I'm personally of the opinion that, of course, it wasn't just a strong punch. There were 2 Haki advancements and a whole awakening that went into it. But also, when it comes down to it, it was basically just a bigger, stronger punch. And I think that Oda may have actually made Kaido too strong. That's not my problem with him, though. My issue with him is number 8, and it's that I still don't understand / quite buy his motivation. Kaido had the potential to be the greatest antagonist in One Piece, but then he just didn't. His flashback, whilst insightful, was not enough. I don't know how he made the transition from happy young pirate man in the early days with King to depressed, cruel, and cynical alcoholic. I say all the time that a One Piece arc is only as strong as its main antagonist. And despite being the strongest creature in the world, Kaido doesn't quite get there for me. I honestly believe that Doflamingo, Katakuri, and even Big Mom were better antagonists. I feel like I understand all 3 of them. I don't agree with them, but I understand them. And each of them are legitimately empathetic in their own unique ways. With Kaido, I can't even get that far. And like I said with Zoro, this was a now or never moment for Kaido. I can't imagine that we're going to take time out in the future for a Kaido deep dive. This was his moment to shine, and instead of oiling himself up for glorious presentation, Kaido decided to roll around in the dirt, and instead of shining, he became rather dulled. Even then, he was still pretty great, so that's forgivable to me. Everything so far has. Nothing is series breaking by any means. But there are still 2 things about Wano that don't sit well with me, and both of them happened pretty much right at the end. And number 9 is simply Yamato. This character was introduced with a clearer purpose than any other. We had a streamlined mission to join the Straw Hats and fulfill the will of Kozuki Odin. So when given the opportunity to do exactly that, Yamato declines, and declines for what is, in my opinion, no good reason. I'm not here to argue whether or not Yamato would have made a great Straw Hat, but I am here to argue that the fact that Yamato isn't aboard the ship right now, given everything we've seen and heard, makes no sense at all. I guess I'm going to say it for a 3rd time, but this was a now or never moment. Luffy is literally setting sail from Wano to become the Pirate King as we speak. And Yamato declined this adventure in favor of traveling around Wano, a task that will take a week or 2 at most, and is also completely irrelevant in the grand scheme of finishing Odin's task about bringing about the dawn of the world and, all of the stuff it is we're trying to do. I think the worst part of it is that it happened off screen. After the raid, Yamato was still hell-bent on becoming a Straw Hat. So whatever epiphany occurred, it happened off screen, and we just saw the results. Reading 1057 felt like I'd skipped a chapter. Because if you are going to bait and switch like this, then that's fine. That's called a plot twist. They're cool. But I think at the very least, we need to see the moment where that actually makes sense. The reason why Yamato can't join right now is clearly more of a meta purpose. Oda has a different plan, and I guess this chess piece just needs to be elsewhere. I just wish he could have come up with an excuse that I'd actually buy. Because as a result, Yamato is now a bit of a broken character for me. But with that said, I think the biggest flaw of Wano is the incredibly abrupt ending. Wano's ending was rushed, and we know this for a fact. It was revealed that Oda sped up the story to, quote, make it fit with the release of Film Red. So what we have is a situation where Oda spent almost 4 years painstakingly setting up the most ambitious story he's ever tried to tell, and just as he is about to land this narrative plane ever so smoothly, he decided that crashing the plane would actually get us there a bit faster, and we rushed the climax of this 4-year story in order to construct a coordinated marketing push to tie into the release of a non-canon film. And it's a shame because satisfying endings are important. It'd be kind of like if I spent roughly 10 minutes building up this video only to have it end with,